So, greetings and welcome back to another discussion on the channel. I think today's talk will be interesting. A little bit of an intro. The young man I'm going to be talking to today originally showed up on Monday's channel, or the late great Monday, as I like to refer to him, because his channel is now defunct. And they had an interesting discussion back in the day. I don't think that video exists anymore in any capacity, even maybe the archives that people have stored. But he was kind enough to reach out to me because I had wanted to talk to him about 3 years ago, maybe something like that, about his experiences with autism and really sort of, I guess you could say, overcoming it or sort of getting past it. I think part of the interesting thing here is that if you spend any time online, in particular, and just the lingo these days is such that everyone uses the term autism. Everyone's an autist, right? And really, obviously, if you pay attention, what they really mean, they don't mean that you're officially diagnosed with autism. They mean you're acting weird or you're acting out of place or something like that. So they say, oh, you're just being autistic. They don't mean, oh, you're officially, according to psychiatrists, you're autistic. Well, the difference today is that the young man I'm talking to has had a diagnosis of autism officially at age 4, I believe he told me. And
Yeah, and it was for Asperger's. I want to clarify it was
oh,
for Asperger's.
Asperger's.
That's the
Okay.
type.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a subcategory effectively of autism. Yeah. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, I mean, something that almost certainly would have an impact on a person's social life, and as to be distinguished from what I've come to call the sort of the internet variety of autism, where stop spurging out, you're acting like an autist. Well, that's not what we're talking about today. So I am really curious at the outset of how does that manifest itself when you're actually diagnosed with autism? And I know autism is on a spectrum. So clearly, and we'll talk about how you, I guess, evolved and managed to get past
Mhm.
that. But there's a kind of autism, I guess, a really extreme, you call it strain or variety, where the person just, I mean, he's not even socially inept. He doesn't even know what to do or handle social situations. You were never in that particular category, were you?
Um, yeah, so when I was a kid, I would say I don't know want to say I was never I was probably pretty close to that. When I was and obviously there's no I want to make something clear when I talk to you, and I want your audience to know this. I'm going to try to without without being too time consuming or too cringy. I really want to kind of go into detail about my experiences because I don't really have a piece of paper that says, hey, I was with me that I can show your audience that says, "Hey, I was diagnosed at 4 with Asperger's." So I'm going to try to make this as I guess as try to make it as legitimate as I can, and try to prove through certain experiences that I had that this really happened to me. So that's why I might be going into, you can stop me, but that's why I might go into over detail over some things because I want your audience to have faith in me because unfortunately, due to the internet today, like you said, a lot of people they don't really have it, they lie about it or whatever. So I'm going to try to make it a as legitimate of an experience as I can.
Sure.
Um, so it was weird because when I was a kid, I knew I was different. And I actually, due to my autism, it was kind of interesting because it was easy for me to accept. I knew that people were easily annoyed with me. People were they really didn't want. They really didn't there really wasn't a lot of hope for me. And I could see that very when I was very very young, and I kind of this might sound a little depressing, but I kind of accepted it. Like for instance, like if I were to go to a, a birthday party, for instance, and if I were to go to a birthday, uh, there's some doctors and people in my family, so very very stereotypical middle class, upper middle class life. And just for your audience to know, I am half black, so I'm sure that had some impact, but that's not what we're talking about right now. But we would go to, if we were to go to a birthday party for a kid my same age, let's say go to a cousin's birthday party, I would essentially, I would just be there. I might eventually become the butt of the joke. People would give me concerned looks. But basically, I could stand in the middle of the grass at a huge birthday party. Think of a very stereotypical middle class birthday party. You got the bouncy house, you got the adults drinking in the corner, you got the kids on the swing set. A very stereotypical middle class birthday party. I could be standing in the middle of the grass lawn, and nobody was going to give two craps if I was there or not. And that was something that I would say pretty much up until middle school or late elementary school. That was something that I felt and I understood. And part of the reason why I sympathize with your channel and a lot of your viewers, even though I'm not in that position anymore, is because I knew in that instance, and this is why I'm a believer in, I don't want to say the term, but the BP, I'm a believer in it, is because I kind of understood that there was really nothing I could do in that situation when I'm standing in the grass at that birthday party. There was nothing I could say or I could do to will myself into a better social position, so to
Question
speak.
question on that particular
Yeah,
situation. So, would you say that the people who were avoiding you and you were just standing there in the grass, was that because at the time at least, to them it seemed like a tremendous amount of effort to engage with you, and they couldn't just sort of have a casual conversation because of your Asperger's, and so they got frustrated maybe, they were impatient. I mean, what would you attribute that to, basically, their avoidance?
yeah. Yeah, I would say that that is definitely part of it. I would say that a big thing about it is just not quote unquote fitting in. And one of the things that I kind of noticed is that I'll talk about more in the future is I don't believe mainstream people. This is a controversial take that I have. I don't believe mainstream people are nearly as stupid as people in this sector tend to give credit to. Um, I think a lot of people know what they're doing. I have some semi proof of that. Like I said, we'll talk more about my high school days. We'll get more in the weeds with that. But for right now, it was because I was completely unrelatable. I'm surrounded by fully white people mostly. I'm half black, and then the Asperger's thing on top of that. And it was just, I think, something people wanted to stay away from. I got the sense it was bad PR. It was just bad. It was something that people just didn't want to touch. And I really kind of know that's the truth because my grandparents. So I'm not trying to get off subject. This is directly related, but um, I was born into a very stereotypical kind of situation that you'd expect, single mother, yada, yada, yada. My grandparents ended up getting guardianship and raising me. And my grandparents basically, when I was a kid, their advice was, and I wasn't abused by any means. They were actually pretty good to me in all fairness. But their thing was pretty much either stay under the radar or just try your absolute best to get as mainstream as you can. Just try to get in that mainstream section if you can. And that was basically the extent of my goals up until I would say about fifth or sixth grade was just try to get in that into that mainstream. Don't try to, nothing, no lofty goals whatsoever. It's just try to kind of get into that mainstream section. And that's part of the reason why I believe one, mainstream people aren't as stupid as a lot of people in this sector might think, because I do think they can read between the lines and see what's happening. But two, I found it very interesting that that kind of confirmed what I was thinking, and it wasn't that I was just like it wasn't that like, oh, I just didn't say the right thing, or I wasn't being nice enough to the other kids. It was basically kind of like, we don't want you to be completely screwed, kid, and you're gonna have to you're gonna have to do what you can to not be in that position. And so that was kind of my experience with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, on that point, mainstream people, so-called, i.e., normies, yeah, I think a lot of them aware of these things that people will talk about in so-called black pill circles, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is people in the mainstream have all agreed upon a certain narrative of events and how things work in the world, even if they know, as you pointed out, you know, how to read between the lines, and even if they know that, it's just not true. So it's something I've talked about frequently. I mean, if you're at a party or a social gathering, so certainly as an adult, work in a situation like that, and there's some fat and ugly chick there, you don't just explicitly go up and say, "Hey, you really don't fit in here. You're fat and ugly." I mean, everyone knows
Hmm.
it, everyone acknowledges it, but there's a kind of unspoken code that you're not supposed to be outrageously
Hmm.
impolite and whatever. Now, there's going to be a kind of side effect to that. I mean, she's going to get a lot less attention than the not fat and ugly chicks, and the people are the more average looking. But you don't go out of the way, and I think in that sense, yes, mainstream or normal or normie people uh, know what's up. It's just they maybe don't know the same degree what's up, and they're also not willing to break certain conventions and rules the way people that talk about it more openly do, as we tend to on this channel and other places, because I think in a lot of ways they like the established order, and I guess it works for a lot of people. Uh,
Well, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no.
Sorry.
The final point on that is, as a friend of mine has pointed out many times, I mean, it's you with matters like this, and I think more broadly in life, you only really start thinking about particular problems if you're confronted by them directly. Which is to say, and if you've never had a particular problem, you're not going to spend a lot of time in depth about it. Which is why, famously, it's a meme now. But Chad Thunderschlong saying, just have a shower and wear a button-down shirt, and you'll have and go to the gym, and your problems are
Yeah.
solved, because he's never had that problem. And it really works in every sphere of life. I mean, if you're not really dealing with a problem, you're not going to really spend much time figuring it out. Whereas if you do have to deal with something, you're going to fail, right? There are going to be failures you have to deal with. And if you want to somehow extricate yourself from that situation, you're going to have to think long and hard about how you can do it, which means understanding the way systems work, in this case, social systems.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I'm going to say, and this is actually, again, my life will probably get really juicy about high school because in high school, a lot of these social norms actually come into confliction with me. And so you'll see that directly then. But one of the things, so this is kind of taking a high school point to my younger years, but one of the things that I didn't notice when I was a kid, but something you may find interesting that, again, when we get to high school, that you'll see more abundantly is that one of the things I noticed about mainstream people, and it makes sense, is that a lot of people it's actually very kind of cold and calculated in a pretty package, if that makes sense. Because what I noticed from a lot of mainstream people is that it was basically one of the reasons a lot of people basically didn't give two shits about me was essentially um, people didn't really see anything out of me that they could mold or they could groom or they could really build up. And one of the interesting things about that is that's actually probably the bigger reason than anything else of why uh kind of why all this happens because a lot of it is it's like, well, he's part black and he's autistic, so he's the kids probably never, keep in mind I'm from around the Casey area, so I'm not it's like I'm from around Birmingham or Mobile, Alabama, but still it's a very white area. They're thinking, well, what can this kid really be? I mean, what can he, I mean, can we really see people respecting this guy? Can we see people doing business with this guy? Could this, there really wasn't a lot of hope for me in any which way. A lot of people probably thought he probably has autism. He probably wouldn't be good at sports. Hand-eye coordination, which again, when I get to high school, we'll talk about. I had a very interesting
Maybe talk
experience with
about, I don't
that.
mean to interrupt, but
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
the
Go ahead. What were
autism,
you
I
asking?
mean, my understanding of autism convention, I mean, did you struggle picking up on social cues? You'd be in a situation, everyone would understand sort of the underlying body language, but you were just sort of clueless. I mean, you say, I believe you obviously. How did that manifest itself? Did you struggle to pick up on social cues and signals? What was it, what, I mean, I get how people treated you, and that might be in part due to being half black and just in general your diagnosis. But what did you actually struggle with as an individual diagnosed with autism or Asperger's?
Yeah, well, no, so that's where again, this is where it gets all muddy because it is all pretty much interconnected. One of the things is that it wasn't. So the thing about being autistic is uh I pretty much knew exactly what was it. I would describe when I was a kid, this might be terrifying, but I would describe it was kind of like a sleep paralysis where I knew exactly what was going on, but there really was nothing I could do. And the reason I knew exactly what was going on is because with autism, you're very good at of picking up on patterns. You see it over and over again. You say, okay, like my mind is very much kind of like a data science machine. Now, basically, I don't really understand at the very like I understand emotions. I understand kind of why mainstream people do things they do through watching them and kind of studying them. I don't really at the very fundamental core understand what it's like to be that kind of person. I don't really understand fundamentally like what it's really like to feel that. But through observing, I can pick up very easily and I can kind of pick up on how things work and how things go together. So when I was a kid, the reason I was talking so, and I'm going to talk so much about how I was treated is because that gave me the data for me to be like, okay, this is how it's working. This is how it's going. I'm not well liked. There's really nothing I can do to get out of this. Anytime I go to a social event or anytime, like to give you an idea, if I were to go to when I was a kid, keep in mind this is when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, what would happen was if I did some very absurd things, and my grandmother would be irate with me sometimes, and like they wouldn't beat me or anything, but they would be very pissed, and I actually didn't know what I was doing until later on, and I think it was me trying to get attention, but I would just do like stupid things, like we were at a birthday party when I was like 5 or 6. And I blew out my cousin's candles for him on the birthday cake, and it wasn't my birthday, and people were not happy about that. And I think that looking back on it, I did that because one, I wanted to test boundaries, which is something a lot of people do, but two, I kind of knew the only way for me to get known, as sad as it is to do absurd, obnoxious, shit. And when you notice that treatment keeps going on, and you can tell you're very invisible, and you're always the butt of the joke, or people are just like kind of give you a look, and it's like it's I mean you just interpret it, and it's kind of I don't really understand at the very fundamental core what it's like to be those people. That's not what I'm saying. But through the observations and processing data and just being treated that way. I mean, once you've been treated that way for so long, you're just kind of like, okay, something's not right here. Little Johnny over there, he's getting treated a lot different than I am, and he's having no issues, and he's not really charismatic, or he's not really going out of his way or anything, and that was something that I just noticed.
Hmm, interesting. Okay.
I mean, I could go more into. I mean, I the best way to describe it, if I could, is I noticed when I was a kid that if I was really to explain to you what I was thinking, what I was feeling, it was very much it was very much like I'll give you an example. If we had my grandparents actually had my cousins come over a lot, they would stay over a lot when I was a kid, because their parents were their mom was a doctor, and their dad actually was a wealthy lawyer, and he actually had a CPA's license. He ended up drinking himself to death. That's another story. But their kids would come over and stay with us, whatever. Eh, those kids could do no wrong. I mean, they now part of it was because they were guests, obviously, but my cousins really, there was a very, 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 very high threshold of tolerance. For me, if I said something maybe slightly stupid, or I knocked over a juice box or something like that, it was pretty much my ass. Again, I wasn't getting beat or anything, but people were not afraid to humiliate me, to embarrass me. There was not a lot of empathy for me. That was something I noticed when I was a kid. And I'm not trying to get people to feel sorry for me. Like I said, things have changed dramatically, but in those years, it was definitely, it was hard not to pick up on. It was hard not to pick up on, like, yeah, it's, you know, uh, I was always getting like criticized for my I actually stuck my thumb up until about 10 because it was such a comforting thing for me, and I would always get chastised for that, like you got to stop sucking your thumb, that's not normal, and you got to stop doing it, don't do that in public. But it was kind of a comfort thing for me, and so there really wasn't a lot of I would describe it a little bit kind of like Harry Potter, a little bit like in the books, a little bit like that. Not quite to that extreme by any means, but it was similar to that, where I just rubbed people the wrong way, and there was nothing I could really do to save my ass, and that's something that when you just get hit with it over and over again, and it's in very awkward situations, it's kind of I think with my autism and me being able to recognize patterns, which is very much a trait that autism, especially Asperger's people have. I think that I just kind of picked up on it easily and was like, yeah, this is just kind of how it is.
It's interesting you bring that up, and by no means saying that you're a psychopath or anything like that, but it has been observed in so-called antisocial behavior, which is basically an umbrella term for people who are so-called psychopaths. And again, I'm not saying you're one of them, but when you lack certain, I guess, normal social facilities, or you're just not very good at it, the fallback system usually is, at least in terms of smart people who have these disabilities, to observe patterns basically, and then to try to mimic them somehow, and really use that as a metric rather than some sort of intuition. So I guess that's basically what happened with you. You developed a kind of uh, yeah, a pattern seeking system, not really based on intuition, but based more on just pure observation.
Well,
And that,
yeah, and
yeah,
and actually, one of the things I will say, and again, when we get to high school, you'll find this interesting. You'll see, I won't sugarcoat it with you. I think that I was probably on the borderline of being a psychopath in my high school years. Again, we're not talking about those years yet, but it's interesting you said that because I've admitted that to certain, obviously, I was borderline. On the I was never gonna I was too, I guess, maybe self-absorbed or egotistical to hurt anybody, because I knew that that would be the end of me, so I never thought about that. But I would say that I pretty much in my high school years, and I'll talk about it, I'm not in that state anymore, thank goodness. But in my high school years, I would say that I definitely was right on the edge of that, because things changed for me and I felt very invincible, and all those patterns kind of came back to me, and I thought that I could manipulate things using those patterns. So again, we're not talking about that yet, but I thought that it was interesting that you said that, because in my high school years, that was definitely probably something that I probably got very close to going over the edge with.
yeah, man, that's something that's been observed in psychopathic behavior. Again, I'm not saying you are, but in people who are actually psychopaths, they actually have deficiencies in their brain that uh, basically prevent them from having empathy. But if they are good at reading patterns and they're sufficiently intelligent, yeah, they develop typically manipulative tendencies and patterns because they understand how the social system works. They also understand that other people are operating more on intuition, and so they take advantage of that. That's how really they operate and how they're able to really do reasonably well. A lot of them, the ones that aren't outright violent, of course. But yeah, that's really kind of how that develops. I'm not saying you are that, but if you don't have that natural system built in, then you typically observe, and if you're self-serving, yeah, you'll make use of that and use it to manipulate people to the best of your ability. So throughout your childhood,
Also,
go on.
sorry, one thing that you'll find interesting too, again, when we get to the high school thing about the mainstream people, and this is something that I kind of hinted at on when we were talking on Discord, is that you'll see that it's kind of more proof that mainstream people aren't as idiotic as I think people in the space think they are. Because one of the things I noticed is when I ascended in high school and kind of grew into my own, that basically there was a lot of alarm from normal people, quote unquote, that this isn't good. And I think that a lot of it bordered with, again, well, we're not talking about that right now, but just because we're talking about it right now, the psychopathy thing, I got the sense that a lot of mainstream people knew what was happening to me and they knew why it was happening to me. Like they knew that when I was younger, how I got treated. They knew kind of probably I wasn't in the most stable position. And I will talk about it a little bit in my high school years, but there were some hints, some weird things that some family members said to me that kind of showed me people were concerned at my ascension, and I think they didn't think I was going to be able to handle it very well, and it was going to go to my head or whatever, because I wasn't again, I wasn't groomed for anything. I wasn't there was no cultivation into me when I was a kid. There was no, hey kid, you can be this, you can be that. It's like,
Well,
it was just kind of like, hey kid, get the hell out of here, basically.
based on in part, I mean, there are a number of things you've mentioned. One of the things, and
Uh-huh.
it's up to you, you want to go into it or not, but effectively, you said you're basically byproduct of a single mother. You said that.
Uh-huh.
You were essentially sort of dumped off to your grandparents because I don't know the details. You don't have to reveal them if you don't want, but for whatever reason, your mother couldn't handle it, or I have no
Yeah,
idea.
no, no, she was a stereotype. My mother's a very stereotypical single mom. Basically,
Hmm.
had no business being a mother. Had me. Actually, got in a bad car wreck when I was in her womb.
Oh.
Got like a $50,000 settlement. Pissed it away. My grandfather, being a fairly wealthy businessman, he knows a lot of investment things. He was pretty pissed off about that. And basically, my mom screwed off for a little bit, became a felon.
Hmm.
I have good standing with her now. She's married out in North Carolina. I visit them a lot. Yada 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 yada. But very very stereotypical. And this is the interesting thing about my life. Again, keep this in mind when we talk about high school and where I'm at now. But the interesting thing about my life was what I was born into was very stereotypical for kind of your shit out of luck. Born to a single mother, black father that I had a few opportunities to meet. I never did because it really never it really never kind of, I don't know, like it didn't bother me that I didn't know him, but it was never of great importance to me. I always heard he was kind of worthless for my half siblings because my dad has other kids. But very stereotypical single white mother that hooked up with a black guy and it didn't work out, and then basically my grandparents didn't even have guardianship of me until about 12, which is when my mother was finally able to release all the paperwork. So basically, when I was a kid, I was a perfect recipe for basically you're screwed. And so and that was kind of why I made a big deal about my ascension, because it's bizarre that from my situation when I was a kid, that I was even remotely able to get to even close to where I'm at now. And so, to give you an idea of my background, that was basically it. It was very stereotypical, very kind of, you're probably going to be trailer trash, or you're going to live in the ghetto, or you're going to be very uneducated, or you might end up in prison. That was very much kind of my background.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, and it makes sense because yeah, I'm not going to fault anyone necessarily, but I guess one could say, given the situation, that your parents kind of took you on grudgingly, right? Almost as a burden. Like, well, it's kind of the right thing to do. We're kind of obligated, but it really wasn't something they were probably too thrilled about at the moment, at least at that time, right? Is my sense of what you're giving me, at least. So that might in part explain some of the treatment that you
Yeah,
received.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things that I will say that, and I actually, at the end of this interview, if we have time, I do want to kind of give some hope to your viewers about this. Is the interesting thing about my life experience, what I pretty much figured out from it, is that a lot of and a lot of people already know this, but a lot of these environmental things, these big picture environmental things, these are really kind of the winds that are really going to kind of mold you into what you're going to be. Because like I said, high school was the pivotal point for me. And when we talk about that eventually, you'll see that was when things catapulted me in a completely different direction, and I had absolutely no control over it whatsoever. And so I think that this is kind of the in some ways I'm kind of more at peace with the world than probably most people would be, and I'm not resentful in the slightest because I pretty much realized a long time ago that it's kind of the winds of the environment and kind of just kind of the various situations that you inherit that are going to be a huge, if not all, of the impact that's going to pretty much determine who you are. And so I pretty much kind of I'm at peace with that. Like it's not even worth it me being mad at my mother because hell, I'm about to have a two fairly prestigious degrees, a mechanical and electrical engineering degree, and it's not even my money. So it doesn't even make sense for me to be mad at my mother because it's like, well, everything's kind of working out for me in the end. So, screw it, I guess. But I kind of, I came at peace a long time ago with maybe one of the reasons I might come off as a bit of a psychopath is that, and this is kind of, I think that this is kind of something you'll find interesting about me is that I was dealt a lot of really bad cards and really good cards. And I realized that both of them had a lot of intrinsic inherent properties to them, and you just can't escape them. You just can't. And
Well,
that's just kind of what it is. And so,
one point,
yeah,
if
go
I
ahead, go
may.
ahead, go ahead.
I mean, if you're getting a double degree in some sort of engineering field,
Yeah.
definitionally you can't be dumb. Nobody who's an idiot can get an engineering degree and do well, and it's just not possible. It's just not how things like IQ and just intelligence work. So yeah, I mean, it would be entirely a different story. I mean, all these you could say obstacles, being biracial, single mother, et cetera, et cetera. But if you'd just been of average intelligence, right, or even below average, almost certainly your life would have turned out very differently. So, absolutely, it all depends on the cards you're dealt. But you better just hope you get lucky and you get dealt some pretty good cards. I mean, despite some of the bad cards you've been dealt based on what you've said and told, you ultimately got some very important cards. If you can pursue an engineering degree and do well in it, then those are some pretty good cards because not everyone can do that. In fact, very few people can. So,
Well, again, this is going to be where high school gets interesting because I don't want to muddy the waters too much. Can I just
well,
call
let's talk
you?
about. It's called me
What do you want to be called? What do you want to be called? Do you want me to call you Thinking-Ape, Mister? What do you want to be called?
Thinking-Ape is fine. But
Thinking-Ape. No. Before you say that though,
hmm,
I want to make this clear. I actually was not a great student when I was a kid. In fact, that was one of the issues I had when I was a kid was that I was kind of I wouldn't say a horrible student, but not a great student by any means because one because of my really bizarre home life, but also I know this for a fact because that was actually one of the things a lot of people thought about me when I was in elementary was that I was subpar intellectually because I was surrounded by a lot of doctors' kids. But the interesting thing about it was, since they were doctors' kids, their mother was a doctor, their father was a successful CPA slash lawyer. He had a big law degree, like I said. They were forced into kind of this educational mind, whereas it was kind of like, well, this kid's he's not going anywhere. So education was never even really pushed on me when I was younger. So that's something that you might find interesting that when I was a kid, I actually was not even remotely, even in intellectually, I was not on the road to, I would even say to maybe to even go to college, period. So,
oh, you talked a lot about high school. I mean, we can fast forward a little bit. So you're basically, I don't know, ages 0 to 10 or 12 or whatever. You're an outcast. Nobody pays attention to you, or they do. It's very limited, and it's usually well, it's usually in I mean, I guess a chastising way. You mentioned. So you get to high school, and there's some point in time, despite your Asperger's and all these limitations, something clicks, something happens where I mean, you'll explain it, I guess, but people start treating you differently. You're no longer the social pariah. You're just something happens. So, what exactly happened, and what would you attribute it to? What exactly happened? Tell us.
I will talk about middle school for a split second because it
Okay.
is relevant for my freshman year of high school. It's
Ah,
relevant for my freshman year.
okay.
So I can't entirely skip it. Middle school was weird because again, I'm not trying to take over the interview. I hope you don't think that it is relevant.
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
middle school was interesting because I had a very, very, very normal, and this is kind of important for high school too, because I don't want people to think I'm some crazy psychopathic egomaniac. I did have very, very normal experiences. When I was in middle school, I was in a very I actually kind of ascended to a mainstream position, so to speak. And that was just kind of like you said, figuring out kind of who to get in bed with, so to speak, who to talk to, kind of figuring out some of these social cues. But I didn't really feel them, but I kind of, but middle school wasn't really that impactful, so I won't talk about it much. But the thing I did notice about it that I think that your viewers might find interesting, and I want to kind of show that I really had these experiences. When I became mainstream, quote unquote, one of the things that I noticed is that it was kind of very similar to my analogy of or it wasn't an analogy that actually happened, but standing in the grass at a birthday party when I was a kid. The only difference is I wasn't offending anybody. So my presence wasn't offending anybody. People didn't mind that I was around them. I was there. I never got the dirty looks. A lot of my teachers kind of liked me in a very mainstream way. They thought, oh, he's funny, this and that, just kind of like all the normal things. But
Mhm.
um, I wasn't. It was interesting because it, I kind of was playing the system a little bit, and I kind of, I knew the right way to be funny. I knew kind of how to interact with people. I kind of started learning how not to take it too far. My grandparents were very proud of me. They had guardianship. They actually thought they're like, wow, you've done it. You've kind of mixed with the mainstream. And this is relevant for high school because I noticed that that's kind of where people are like, okay, this is the end of Trace's story. He ascended to kind of the mainstream. And so to speak, obviously, there's, like I said, me being part black. I mean, I wasn't going to fully fit into a fairly white school, but for the most part, I kind of had been able to kind of coexist quite well. And the interesting thing was that was kind of where a lot of people kind of thought, well, that's kind of the end of the story. He's gonna maybe go to college and get a degree you might as well wipe your ass with, like I don't know, psychology, or maybe get like a business degree, which has pretty much been ruined by the fraternity system. But that was kind of that was kind of the interesting thing about middle school was that was kind of I think a lot of people thought, well, yeah, he's kind of made it to mainstream. We're proud of him, and yeah, right off into the sunset. So I feel like that's kind of important for high school because I just want to lay out that I did have a lot of I did have some of those mainstream experiences where it's like, yeah, you can coexist, you can be here, you can interact, but I mean, nobody's gonna be offended, but at the same time, nobody's gonna be overly impressed by me just being there, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
So, you were wanting to talk about high. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that
That's
detour, but you
fine.
were
That's
wanting to
fine.
talk.
I get it. So there's a transitional period,
Yes,
obviously middle
yes, yes.
school, high school. But in high school, something, I mean, I remember this from, I guess, why the conversation back
Uh,
then between you and Monday stood out to me because, yeah, it was sort of apparently everything that's changed. It was like a 180 essentially. You got a lot of attention, particularly from female kind,
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything just changed. Uh, well, tell us about that. I mean, your Asperger's, you have all these underlying issues, and then one day, how old are you at when this happens? One day it all just shifts and does a 180.
Well, and this is where I'm going to talk probably the most because I think even if you take my talk, I think there's a lot of things that your audience can kind of take out of this, to be frank with you. But the reason I talked about my middle school experiences first was the first part of my freshman year was actually pretty similar to my middle school experience. So when what happened was my grandparents owned property in town. And so I actually went to town illegally to go to school. And I went to a very stereotypical kind of a very stereotypical American town. Um, Kind of dying from the industrial revolution, kind of a really crappy downtown, hollowed out,
Mm,
factories have been shut down. But there was like 80,000 people in my town, and I'm around the Kansas City metropolitan area, so there's an average, I call it an averagely large city, 500,000 people in the city proper, about two and a quarter in the metro area. So kind of your average kind of large city. Not not Houston, not Miami, not New York, but just a very average area. And what happened was is my grandparents didn't want me to go to country schools for I'm sure an obvious reason that a lot of people can kind of pick up on, but they didn't want me to go to country schools. They didn't think I'd get treated well there. So they legally, and I had been this whole time, elementary and middle school, I've been going to school in town as well, but they illegally, you know, let me go to school in town. So what was interesting was the way my city works is, and a lot of cities kind of do this, is at the end of middle school they said, "What high school do you want to go to?" And you could go to any high school. And I chose purposely Central High School, which is the largest high school in town. It has about 1,800 kids, close to 2,000. Again, kind of your averagely large high school. It's not a mammoth high school, but it's not a podunk school by any means. It's very, if you were to be top echelons in sports at that school, you could get maybe a D1 scholarship, and you could ride off into the sunset. So very competitive sports league. And I thought it would be good for me to kind of to force myself to be in an environment like that. That was very, very much my decision at 15. My grandpa really didn't kind of care because he was kind of happy that I had become mainstream. He thought I'd be fine. But my grandmother was very, very concerned. And again, keep this in mind that mainstream people are not as dumb as they give them credit to. My grandmother, basically reading between the lines of what she said, was very concerned, not that I'd be mistreated at Central, because, there's a lot of, other ethnicities and people there, but she was concerned that I was gonna become nothing. I was gonna kind of just get sucked into this large high school system, and there was gonna be no preferential treatment, whether good or bad, and I was just gonna kind of get sucked into the system and just kind of dissipate. And the first half of my freshman year was very much kind of that, middle school. It was basically um, I went up across country. I wasn't quite athletic. I was a late bloomer in terms of puberty, so I didn't really hit puberty hard until about 16. So 15, I was drawing, but it was nothing significant. And the coach was very militant. He was actually a local pastor, a white guy, very militant, and he didn't see a lot of potential for me. And towards the end of the season, I ascended kind of into mainstreamness. I was kind of like, there's some potential there. Very JV. I was not varsity my freshman year. JV, solid JV. And women were, they were pretty indifferent to me. And so, kind of setting the stage for this is, it was interesting because about that first half of my freshman year, um, it was pretty much the same old. And then I would say the second semester of high school, that's when things change. Now, when I start talking about this, it's probably gonna take a while. So, is there anything you want to
yeah, yeah.
interrupt me
So I'm,
with
I'm
or ask
curious
questions?
throughout this. I mean, one thing it's obviously important if you
Uh-huh.
follow things like look. I mean, how tall are you basically?
Um, I'm about in height. Well, now I'm 6'1" and a half, 6'1" and a quarter. Not quite
Okay,
6'2",
all
but
right.
over
So
6'1".
you're in a quote unquote acceptable height range, what you could say by
Yes,
today's
yes.
standards. Yeah. So that probably I'd have to say played some role. Obviously, if you had never grown past much 5'9" or something, things could have turned out quite differently.
Yeah. Actually, before we talk about this, I don't really know. This is kind of embarrassing. I hate to bring it up, but it has to be brought up. And actually, Monday I sent him a video about it, and he actually did talk about this. This may make you feel a little bit better about the rating that you thought I was. I think that the evidence in my area, again, from your generation or where you're at, you might be completely right. But one thing that may make you feel a little bit better about your rating of me is that, um, God, how do I want to say this? This is kind of awkward.
I don't.
Um,
I'm not
there,
really
there is
upset
a
one way or another about the rating, so it's fine. You know?
Yeah, no, 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 no. I just was saying it might make you feel better because there is another portion to this, like you said, height.
Yeah.
Um, no, no, no. I understand you don't want to make. I'm not trying to bring that out, but there's something about this community that they should know because it's all about height and face,
Yeah.
and body is kind of it's in there. And I completely agree. Your body's not going to save you. It's just not. It can help you
Well, it's a
definitely. If,
supplementary thing. If you pass the face and height thing, then
right.
it's
It's a, yeah.
better, not having a gut and being fit is much better than having a gut and not being fit. But if you had to choose, you better take the face and height thing over, being exceptionally fit because if you're 5'6" and average
Yes.
looking, it's nothing's going to happen, right? So,
Yeah. Well, so that's where things get awkward. So those are the kind of three pillars: the face, the height, the body.
mm,
Now, a lot of people are probably not going to believe me on this. So a lot of people, I suggest a lot of people do a lot of research into it because this is something that a lot of people do not talk about. Again, unfortunately, we don't have access to Monday's videos anymore. He did do part of a video on it because I told him a little bit about it. But one of the things that a lot of people will be very, very shocked, a lot of them, I'm assuming most of your community is males, is that you would be surprised how much of a nice ass will help a dude.
okay.
And I bring that up specifically because it's something that almost nobody talks about. I actually was told when I was younger that I always had a quote unquote a nice butt. And that was something that when I got into high school, I kind of grew into a little bit as well. But you would be absolutely shocked, and probably a lot of dudes would be appalled by how important it is. And there's a lot of actually mainstream studies on it. There's been a lot of studies that show it's kind of a sleeper muscle. It's something that women really, really do like, but they don't talk about it a lot. It's actually been rated as one of the most important muscles that a man can have in a few studies. And the interesting thing about it is it's actually very similar to the face. So my theory, and when I was talking to Monday originally, what we mainly talked about was why these things were happening. And my theory was the reason it took so long for guys to realize how important a face was that there's not a lot of guys that are stereotypically attractive, whether that's really, really poor grooming, because a lot of guys they don't understand the importance of grooming, they don't understand the importance of kind of looks, so they don't really worry about it and they just let themselves go. Now they might be completely average, but by the time they're 30, they've sunk into like a 4 or 3 because they've just become slobs and like, well, women just like personality, of course. That's actually something very similar to the buttocks. Is a lot of dudes they have completely flat asses. You go to your local store or something, dudes have completely flat asses. A lot of dudes don't have an ass. One of the things that might surprise you is that women really, really, really like a nice ass, and actually that paired with a nice body can probably pull you up about a full point. Now the thing with an ass though is it's actually pretty. It's kind of brutal like the face because a lot of dudes they just don't have an ass, and so you can work out all you want, you can go to the gym, you can do barbell thrusts, you can do things like that, but a lot of dudes I don't want to say you're as screwed as the face, but there's not a lot you can really there's not a ton you can do there, and that's actually one of the reasons why I think it's actually considered so attractive by women is it's actually with supply and demand. There's not a lot of supplies of it, and actually I've been told that by a lot of women. They're like, yeah, like a lot of dudes they don't have an ass, and you have an ass, and I find that attractive, and they always admit to me that the face they found attractive first. That was kind of the introduction thing. But I would say to any dudes that if they really want a gym max and they want to get a nice physique is what you want to do is you want to have broad shoulders, you want to have a puffed out chest, not a massive chest, but a puffed out chest. You want to have a skinny waist, like a skinny waist, very narrow hips, have a bubble butt if you can, wide thighs, and then have some calves. And the funny thing is, if you go to a local gym, any local gym, a lot of dudes around there, they got no ass, they have no legs. That's actually one of the reasons women hate guys that skip leg day. That's like something if you go to gym forums, women always complain about. Um, you'll see guys with no ass, no legs, huge calves, and then they got a beer gut, and then they got kind of not quite man tits, but they got big. chest muscles, but they're not really. They're kind of watery. They're not really. I don't know how to describe it. And then they
They're
have
not
massive
defined. They're not
arms.
defined. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, exactly. They're not defined. And that's actually what I think gets a lot of people in trouble with this body thing is one, they don't understand kind of what's important about the body. And two, it's not a lot of them don't get a very defined physique, like you said. And a lot of times, a lot of people they just worry about one or two muscles and that's it, and they don't try to get the full package. So I had to I had to bring that up because there's actually a lot of studies on it. You can go pretty much to any, and actually the funny thing is a lot of mainstreamers are pretty honest about, like even my grandmother would tell me when I was a kid, she's like, you're probably gonna have a lot of women that like you because you have a nicer butt than most dudes. She's like, beware of that, and that was something that a lot of normal people, quote unquote, kind of told me. So it's kind of funny that a lot of normal people actually, it's something that a lot of normal there's a lot of normal sites that talk about the importance of a male's buttocks, but for some reason in this community, it's something that's kind of gone completely under the radar. But I think it's not as important as the face by any means, but it's still very very important, and it's actually one of those muscles that you would want to have if you were going to try to max out your sex appeal. But that was all I wanted to do is talk about that
So
for a second.
essentially, you're saying that ultimately your saving grace were your buttocks, but you were, everything was going downhill, but then the women started
No,
noticing.
no, no, no. It wasn't like that. I was just saying, no, that was that might make you feel a little bit better of what you thought was because that was something that definitely helped me was my was having a nice ass definitely helped me. I
Okay.
can't I have to my height and then having that I kind of have to talk about it unfortunately because even though it is kind of an uncomfortable topic and it's something a lot of dudes don't want. In fact, a lot of women will admit they don't like talking about this because they know a lot of dudes don't like hearing like, "Hey, you got a nice ass." It's something a lot of dudes kind of don't want to hear. It's kind of associated with kind of femininity. But if we're going to be brutally honest about looks and attractivism, there's a lot of evidence that suggests it's a very attractive feature of a body for male or female. And you really can't escape that. So if I'm going to be brutally honest with you, as I'm sure you want me to, I have to admit to you that that wasn't my like I said, a lot of women admitted it was the face first, but that was definitely if I had just a completely flat ass, probably it wouldn't be quite the extent that I had, if that makes sense.
Okay, so essentially, at some point in time, women notice your buttocks, and obviously you're not short, and
Yes.
that's where everything just kind of shifts in a different direction, right?
Well, yeah. So I'll give you the first example, and again, I'm going to go into detail about this. So what happened was we were at a track meet my freshman year, and this is something that you'll notice. I'm not fully for sure why this happens to me. So this is kind of more of an economic topic, I feel like. But one of the things that you'll notice when I talk about my experiences with my ascension, the weird thing is a lot of people that um I want to ask you a question. I'm not trying to make this about you, but I think you said earlier you said you came from what, a lower middle class background?
No, no, just a normal middle class, normal middle class.
Okay, okay. The only reason I ask that is because a lot of people from that kind of that lower middle class to below lower middle class, kind of working class, and maybe like the entry level middle class where you're just kind of barely middle class. A lot of those women and a lot of those people were actually not big fans of me. And we'll talk, and that's something that I also want to be honest about. When I was in high school, a lot of people that I would say, quote unquote, the majority of people were still not big fans of me. I do think there was some jealousy because people did find out that my grandparents were fairly wealthy. My grandparents make anywhere between, they make about $650,000 a year, but obviously my grandfather's a large landowner, so a lot of his money goes back into equipment and farmland and things like that. So even though on paper he's a very wealthy man, a lot of his money is eaten up. So it's not, he probably takes home like 60, 70K a year at the end of the day after all expenses have been paid and his taxes have been paid. But he was in the military, so our health insurance was completely free and things like that. So I had a bit of an unusual experience with that. But a lot of people kind of figured out that my grandparents were a little bit more on the wealthy side. So I do want to put that disclaimer before we start talking about my high school experiences that the majority, I would say, about 70% of the high school kind of system, my high school environment, um, was not really big fans of me. Wasn't really. I don't want to say I wasn't noticed. I was definitely noticed, and we can talk about that more. But they weren't really huge fans of me. What was interesting though is people that had power within the high school system. So teachers, people that came from wealthier families, people that were actually going to go somewhere, so to speak. I noticed that these people began to kind of like me more and more, and actually, we'll talk a little bit about that. That relates to women, my experiences with women, because, like I told you when we were talking on Discord, a lot of the women that liked me, what's bizarre is they actually come from usually higher social economic classes, and they're actually stereotypically women that you wouldn't think would be attracted to a half black man because what studies have shown, there's been a lot of studies, that the BBC theory is not really entirely correct. That was kind of a 70s phenomenon where, after civil rights, white women kind of did the finger to their dads and said, I'm going to date a black guy just to get back at you. And it doesn't hold as much weight today. Studies have shown it's not as attractive of a thing as people thought. And a lot of these niche markets for BBC is usually they're kind of, I hate to say it, but trailer trash and things like that. That's kind of the stereotypical. You
All
see
right,
the black dude
to be
with the
fair, since you're going down this route, my understanding was BBC theory has emerged from porn, sorry, prawn on YouTube,
yeah.
prawn, and it's obviously it's not really borne out in the stats rather than that. But I mean, I take your point that you don't think it's due to some sort of exotic factor, you being biracial. Yeah.
Well, no, and I'm not trying to. I'm not ashamed of being part black. That's not where I'm going with this. Like, oh, like where I'm going down this route is that it's an interesting phenomenon that happened that um it really can't be the BBC thing because that was kind of what I thought originally. I thought maybe I'm being racially fetishized or whatever. But what was interesting is that, like I said, these women were usually from a higher social economic class, and these women were not stereotypically, they're not stereotypically um, what the media would assign to being attracted to, quote unquote, somebody that's part black or full black. And so that is something that I have to point out that actually, when it pertains to the halo effect, is important noting for the future because when I talk about more about my high school experiences, it's relevant because what you'll notice is actually kind of there was a pivot for me to kind of abandon completely my current identity, and I was expected to become something that I basically wasn't, that I really couldn't. And I think a lot of it had to come from kind of the high expectations of the people of these groups. And so I just brought that up because I'm not ashamed of my ethnicity or anything. But if I'm going to be honest with you, it is a phenomenon that happened to me. And even on Tinder, I've noticed it. Like a lot of my matches are people that come from a higher social economic class. You can tell that by the photos. And I actually don't do very well with working class or lower middle class people. I can kind of earn the respect. I can earn the respect through certain lingo and talking to them, but through my experiences, and this is to keep in mind with my high school experiences, I didn't do well with what you would call the majority of people, kind of that working class, that lower middle class people. But the people that I don't want to say really mattered, quote unquote, I don't want to say that, but people that had power, so to speak, that you could ascend with, those are the people that I noticed, whether it was sexual attraction or it was camaraderie. Sorry, I have my Invisalign trays in camaraderie. Those were the people that were kind of drawn to me, and that those were the people that were primarily responsible for kind of my ascension, so to speak.
Hmm. So, but I mean,
Um,
that kind of makes
yeah,
sense. I mean, you described yourself as coming from an upper middle class background, and I don't know if you're familiar with the principle of sort of mating, but social, yeah, birds of a feather flock together. They're overwhelmingly, the tendency is for people in certain socioeconomic classes to want to associate with others of like socioeconomic economic class for obvious reasons, and more things in common, more overlap, etc., etc. So that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, but the thing is, again, I don't want to make this a big point. I'm just this is just a disclaimer. The interesting thing, though, is though looking at my previous experiences, like we talked about, I didn't really fit into that upper middle class slash lower upper class molding because I didn't have private tutors. I wasn't going to a lot of these kids. Actually, I did go to a private Christian school for a hot second for preschool, and I got kicked out due to my autism. They basically said there's nothing we can do for this kid. I was there for like 3 weeks and I got kicked out. I didn't do anything bad. I was making weird noises and they weren't they. It's kind of funny thinking back to it. I kind of laugh now, but I was making like weird noises and I kept bringing toys to classes and things like that, and they just weren't having it. And they're like, yeah, he's got to go after like 3 weeks. So, but other than that, basically, I really didn't have the stereotypical I didn't have the stereotypical that kind of upbringing, even though my grandparents and actually my grandparents. It was funny. I watched your interview with what's that guy that's got a PhD in engineering? You talked to him about Catholicism and
the distributist.
the distributists. Yes, I actually found that interview fascinating. And one thing he said about it was, and this is related to my autism as well, is he said that he noticed that a lot of people from his generation were groomed to be kind of the top echelons and kind of the parents. And that actually, I screamed at the TV when I watched that interview because I said exactly because I noticed that a lot of kids around me that were kind of in that the very solid middle class and above was they were groomed to kind of be like, hey, you're going to be the top of your class, you're going to be this, you're going to be like that. We already talked about my developing stages and how my grandparents were just wanting me to become mainstream. Obviously, my autism, my ethnicity put me at an inherent disadvantage, so there was reasons why they just thought that was should be my goal. But it was funny that when we talk about further going on with this, I really didn't have anything in common with these people in terms of that because I was never groomed to. I was very much groomed at best to be average. So that is something that I found interesting. And actually, you're going to see that that is actually a problem that I had in high school. Was I was groomed to be average at best, and at high school, when I start talking about it, I was expected to raise above that quite dramatically. And since I wasn't really groomed or prepared for that, it was a shit show, to say the least. But I just want to say that as a disclaimer, because I don't want people think I'm an egomaniac where it's like, oh, everybody, no, there's a lot of working class, lower middle class people were not huge fans of me, and there might have been some racial aspect to that as well. Obviously, lower classes, but I still did not have a great rapport with them. So I just want to kind of, I'm not trying to sound like an egomaniac. I just want that as an official disclaimer.
Yeah, sure. So around
Um,
15,
yeah,
or
go ahead.
maybe 16, women start or females start trying paying attention to you, and you basically said it's largely attributable to the height as well as as well as your buttocks apparently. Um,
Uh,
and I mean, so at the end of the day, when I listen to what you've said, yeah, you
uh-huh,
were definitely dealt some rough cards, but you had enough good cards dealt to you such that it's not the story of ascension, if you want to put it that way, is not
uh-huh,
completely absurd to me. It's not as if, if you'd said, well, I had all these problems. I was 5'4". My hair fell out at 15, and I had buck teeth down to my belly button. But for some reason, I think then we might have needed, I don't know, the National Research Institute to come in and to figure out what the hell happened,
yeah.
right? But this is not so alien where I think, wow. But it proves the point, really. I think ultimately the story that you can have certain disadvantages as long as the advantages that you do have are sufficient to outweigh those disadvantages. So you're autistic. Maybe, I don't know, the biracial thing is a negative, whatever. But ultimately, you're at least average looking. You're tall, reason. I mean, actually over 6 feet tall. That is tall, but by today's standards, it's average, whatever. But you're the right
Yeah.
height, and according to you, I have to, I guess, do the research. But you have some nice buttocks as well, and that allows you to create a formula where, well, you're at least come into question when it comes to women taking interest, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas I think you'd admit, since black pill theory, whatever, if if you were 5'8", you didn't have the buttocks, and and other things, right? There probably would have never been an ascension, right?
Well, here's the thing. So basically, what I'm going to mainly talk about, I'm not going to actually, when I talk about with women, and this might make you feel a little bit better, it's actually going to be mainly pretty PG because one of the biggest things that I noticed with women, and this is a general thing, is it was a halo effect, but it was I would call it more of a general halo effect. So I would say that women were kind of a byproduct of this bigger halo effect, so to speak. And I kind of think I know what it was from a social standpoint of why this happened. And by no means, I wasn't. Again, I do not want to come across as an egomaniac. I'm not trying to say that my case is super insanely special. It's just it is unfortunately unusual for somebody to be born into the circumstances I was socially, economically, and with the condition I have to kind of ascend to this point. Um, but the interesting thing that I noticed was, and this is something I want to kind of make a thing about the halo effect, is a lot of people when they talk about the halo effect, they talk about it as if, okay, I go to the local flower shop, right? Me and you go to the local flower shop, and let's say I get a 15 cent discount on flowers, and you don't get a discount, and that's a halo effect, and I might get a wink and a smile from the florist, and that's the halo effect. That's not the halo effect. The halo effect is very interesting because if it happens to you, basically what's expected is um, you are expected to basically completely conform to and you've talked about this. You talked about this with Monday. You talked about kind of like holding frame and things like this. So this is something you're familiar with. But you're expected to take on this role. And the interesting thing that I noticed is that there was a very, very high expectation towards the end of my freshman year, and we'll talk about more specifics that I was asked to achieve. And I'm actually slowly starting to get there, where I can kind of handle that pressure because it's still with me. I'm going to be 24 on the first. I'm 23 right now, so I'm enjoying the last couple of days of my early 20s because I'm soon to be in the mid 20s club. But as of now, I'm at the very, very end of my early 20s, and it's still happening definitely with me now. But when I first went to high school, I I essentially I noticed that I'm going to make a big statement. You cannot, if you, in my experiences with the halo effect, I could not be some guy. I was expected to be the guy. And the interesting thing about this is we talked about my earlier experiences where I was very much not the guy. Very much, I wasn't even a guy when I was a kid. I was just there. I was just, that's Trace. Don't even wave to him. He's over there by the fence. Um, that was very much my experience as a kid. And so it was my head definitely, I'm not gonna lie to you, it exploded in high school because I felt very flattered, but it was a very hard thing for people to say overnight, okay, Trace, we know we treated you like shit the last, 10, 12 years or whatever of your, you being cognizant, to know what's going on. But now we're going to ask you to kind of do a 180 and to kind of um, ascend to somebody that we can respect, that we can talk to, somebody that we can see as a leader, so to speak. And it was expected. It was expected. Now, and I'll go into fine details of how I know it was expected because if I got out of line, if I did something that was minorly stupid or something, if I got out of line at all, the repercussions were very serious. It was a big annoyance. You'd have to listen to a lot of people bemoan and be very disappointed, and things that I know for a fact 3, 4 years earlier, people have been like, "Oh, that's just Trace. Who cares?" And then all of a sudden, it's like, "Well, no, 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 no. You can't do that. You can't do that. We gave you a higher expectation, and you're shitting the bed." And so that was the start of my experience. And so the halo effect is really important because it actually dictates kind of your entire life, how people view you, what people expect of you, and there's really nothing you can do to escape it. It's a very positive thing if you know how to handle it, but if you don't know how to handle it and you just keep crapping the bed, it's kind of like purgatory where people are never gonna they're never gonna disown you. Like people would never disown me in that state. But people are like, hey, you keep shit in the bed. You're a big disappointment. What the hell's going on? I actually had a few talks that were basically like that, where it's like, what's going on? We're giving you all these tools, all this attention, and you're not making anything out of it. You're still very average at best. What's going on here? And so that was kind of the big experience that I was starting to get in high school, so to speak.
Mhm, mhm. And so basically, by the end of high school, you've had a number of experiences with women, you're successful, and then you get to university and things pick up even further from there, right?
There's some examples about high school because that's where the fascinating thing is, and I'm going to talk about mostly social things, not. I'm going to talk a little bit about females, but I want to kind of keep this geared towards your audience, kind of general social things. I just kind of talked about the halo effect. It's kind of like that's the overarching thing that's happening. One of the things that happened to me was that when my freshman year, I was very JV cross country. We talked about this towards the end of my freshman year. This is when I was starting to hit puberty. I was starting to get into it. Now, this probably had a little bit more to do with my ethnicity, probably. But but the interesting thing about long distance running, because I was a cross country runner, is usually long distance runners that are black. They're usually Ethiopian, Kenyan, very East African, very tall and lengthy. I'm kind of in between that. I'm very much an athletic build, and I'm obviously mixed. So that was kind of an unusual, even for that, that was kind of a bit unusual. But one of the experiences that I noticed, that I know this is true, is that my I did a summer initiative between a summer running program that my coach sponsored because when you get to really high levels of high school, if you want to run in college, whatever, you basically got to run like 50 miles a week. It's arduous. And so he was very militant. And what he would do is, if he thought you weren't going to make varsity, he wasn't going to put you with. He didn't believe. Basically, my coach didn't believe in ascension. He didn't like it. He segregated people based on what he thought your talents were. He had a big. I actually think he may have had some autism. To be honest with you, he had a big clipboard, and he was very militant. And if he caught you trying to run with people that he didn't assign you to, or he didn't think you were at their level, hey, he would embarrass you and say, you need to run with your own people. You're not that good. Get back in line. And I actually had experiences with that my freshman year because I started kind of noticing my athletic skill, and I would try to run with better people. And my coach actually embarrassed me a few times. He said, "No," he said, "You're running with get back." And he was very militant. And one of the things that I noticed is in this period is when he started to really see something in me that I didn't see, to be honest with you, and he started really caring about things I did. So if I didn't do stretches right, he would be on. I mean, like he'd be on me like flies on shit. I mean, he'd be on me. He'd be really, 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 really agitated, and um, I noticed that things that I couldn't get away with before I could get away with. And the thing was that I didn't change. My personality didn't change. But the things I said, they became more socially. They were, I, nobody really cared. But the thing was, I was expected to eventually perform, and so this continues. This continues. And one of the situations that happens is when I started my sophomore year, I ran my first varsity meet. And keep in mind, this is like the largest high school class in the state, meaning you're getting the best competition. A lot of people that are in that race, varsity, they're going to end up running Division One. So you're getting the basically the cream of the crop competition. I didn't run for a small hick school, And so my freshman year, I'm just average JV. So I'm running, I mean, it's still our JV races were probably better than a lot of podunk varsity races, but you're basically in the big league, so to speak. So I'm lining up with all these big powerhouse schools from the Casey area, like Lee Summit West and Rockhurst and Staley, all these big powerhouses, and I'm expected to perform at their level, even though they basically, like I said, ever since they were kids, they've been groomed. I mean, you could just tell these kids they had been groomed. They had been groomed to be studs. They were that way. You could tell they had that essence to them. And I always knew that I didn't fit in that situation because there was always a nervousness with me, and there wasn't a confidence with me. I didn't have very much confidence. I loved the attention I was getting, but I didn't have any confidence because I wasn't groomed to have any. And long story short, I did not do very good that first race. I think there was like 260 kids in that race, a very large race, and I got 201st. Not a good race performance, and it was bad. It was very bad. I got a lot of very disappointed looks. People were irate. They thought I'd be in the top 50. I got 201st. I was completely dead. It was a demeaning experience. I did not feel good. I almost collapsed during the race. It was a completely out of this world experience to go from, okay, it's nice getting all this attention. It's nice people thinking that you're going to be a top dog, and then when push comes to shove, and you're in that situation, you have to perform, and you just can't because you were never in that position before. It's a very humbling experience. And so that was one of my first experiences with the halo effect of kind of the positives and the dangers of it.
Mm, mm. But I mean, what happens once you're at university? Because that's really where things seem to take off, and you said that you're in a really good position. Would you say that all those things that happened in the past were sort of left behind, and you entered a completely new phase of your life, and basically you've you're in air quotes normal? I mean, what was the thing about university that pushed you even further up the ladder, so to speak?
Well, here's the thing: between high school and college, so right about high school graduation, going into the summer, it was actually a complete reset to middle school going into high school. I did not have a very good high school career. And again, I have to talk about. I'm going to just talk about it generally very quickly before we move to university, kind of like I did in middle school. I did not have the greatest high school career because like I said, due to the autism and me not being molded and me not having those high expectations put on me when I was 10, 12, 14, 15. I really shit the bed in high school. I really did. I couldn't perform to the caliber I was expected to. I actually got kicked out of AP classes. I was in AP Calc. I got kicked out because I couldn't do it. It was too advanced for me. They thought I could handle it. I couldn't. I got kicked out because my grade was like a 32. And uh, there's all these experiences where basically I just kept shitting the bed. That was kind of my high school career. People kept trying to put me in prestigious positions. I couldn't handle it because I wasn't groomed for it. And so when I graduated high school, there was kind of a somber tone because a lot of people got very excited in my family in high school because they thought, okay, we thought Trace was just going to be mainstream. Now we think he's ascended to the point where he could really be something. And kind of, I think a lot of those dashes were hoped with high school because there was kind of this thought of, well, you know, he kind of he had all these opportunities and he just didn't make anything of it. I was varsity cross country, but I was by no means good enough to get a good scholarship, and I wasn't academically competent to get a great academic scholarship or whatever. And so yada 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 yada. When I had a buddy that I really had no plans to go to university. In fact, my family was really pushing me. Hey, just go to trade school, just be an electrician. Hell, my grandpa was really wanting me to, and this is talking about the halo effect again. My grandpa was talking to me about inheriting his farm in high school at my peak when I was a sophomore and I was on my ascension. He was talking to me about inheriting the farm, which is a multi-million-dollar business. By my senior year, that was done. There was no, it was kind of like a reset. It was like, hey, you know, you're somewhat and actually I'll tell you something that you'll find interesting. This is something my grandma said to me, and you'll find this was between my high school and college year. My grandmother told me, she said, Trace, you think the world of yourself, and you think that you're great, but I hate to tell you something, but you're just average. And the funny thing is, 3 or 4 years earlier, that's not what they were saying. When I was a sophomore or whatever, they thought I was really going to be something. But I think that there was a refusal to, I think that my grandparents were kind of upset at themselves because they realized they didn't groom me. I shit the bed. I couldn't handle the pressure. And I ended up performing, I would say, like good average, meaning I was in good positions, but I still performed very, very averagely within those positions. I didn't excel. And so going into college, there was kind of this mentality of, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. I didn't get my grandpa thought a lot of my extended family was gonna give me some money. They're like, I think I got like $300 when I graduated high. I mean, they're really it was a big setback when I graduated, and there was kind of this big thing like, Trace, start thinking about the trades, being like, being an engineer was still not in the cards. What changed was I had a buddy that was going to go down there to where I was at. I almost said I'm not going to say the name of the school I go to, but he was going down to the university that I'm at now, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to come down with me? Apply and it's a D1. They have everything you could ask for." And I was like, "You know what? Fine." And I ended up going down there, and one of the first experiences I had that was interesting was that I actually got recruited by one of the more I'll just say the name Sigma Chi because it's a national fraternity. I got recruited by Sigma Chi, and the whole interesting thing about that um, is that they're actually one of the fraternities. So, how familiar are you with the fraternity system? Like, how familiar are you with it?
A little bit. I know a little bit about it.
Well, the interesting thing about it was that I don't want to say it's a prestigious fraternity, but it's a lot harder to get into. They usually have about 200 kids come out, 200 guys, and keep in mind there's a lot bigger chapters than mine, but there's usually about, or what mine was. I'm not in it anymore, but there's about 200 guys that come out, and about 38 to 42 get bids usually, which means you get an invite to join. I hadn't showed up to any events. And I was going wild. I was like your typical freshman, getting wasted every night. I threw up in my dorm a few times, just going wild, freshman craze. I hadn't been to, there wasn't a lot of fraternities courting me. Now, keep in mind, my fraternity is pushing the deep, or my university is pushing the deep south. It's not in the deep south, but it's pushing the deep south. So there's actually a lot of alum from the 60s and 70s. And it's actually a big deal. You can do your research. It's actually a really big deal. A lot of alum with big white fraternities do not like the idea of having black people in their fraternities. There's a lot of, if you go south the Mason-Dixon line, especially like your more prestigious fraternities, a lot of the alum from like because there's some alum that are, that were in the university before civil rights were passed, and they're not the biggest fans of that concept. So there's actually still kind of a racial aspect to it. That might have been something, but I wasn't really recruited by a lot. I didn't really. I just kind of made an ass out of myself and got drunk. I didn't know really much about Rush or fraternities. And about the very end of Rush Week. So it's called Rush Week, but it's actually 2 weeks in the fall. It's one in the spring. I met a guy. He looked like a stereotypical. You'd probably call him a Chad, but basically a stereotypical good-looking guy just working out at a local gym. I said, I bet that guy's in a fraternity, and I was wanting to join a fraternity before it was over, but it was almost the end of Rush. And so I said, you're in a fraternity. He smiled. He looked at me. He's like, I could tell he liked what he saw. He liked who I was. He's like, yeah, yeah, man, yeah. He's like, what's your number and your name? And I was like, oh, this and that. The next day I'm in a BS Gen Ed. I think it was like it was very similar to gender studies. It wasn't gender studies, but it was a very, very BS class. And I get a huge text message and they're inviting me to go to dinner. They want me to go to dinner with them off campus, or they said if I can't make it, we can have a meal at the mansion with some of the guys, because they're like, there's no more rush events, there's no more official meet and greets as they call them. So they would really like me to come through, and they could kind of get a one-on-one with me before bid day, because they'd like to know. I mean, a big message. And I didn't drive at the point. I didn't have a vehicle at that time. I do now, but I didn't drive at the time. I actually didn't even have a license at the time. I didn't get a license till like not long ago. But they came and picked me up. And they took me to their mansion, and this is not nefarious. They actually, for guys that really they want to recruit, I've heard stories of where guys have been swarmed by 20, 30 guys. Um, in public trying to get them to come out. So if you're somebody they really want, they usually pull out all the stops. And they took me to the mansion, and they showed me around or whatever, and they're talking to me. They're showing me, it was a brand new mansion. They just built it, flat screens everywhere, hardwood floors, stainless steel kitchens. And they were talking to me about me coming out, and I said, yeah, 'cause it was like one of my, and this is something that, again, this goes back to what I said in high school, where the lower echelons of things kind of give me a pass, but the higher ups usually like, yeah, we see something in this guy, because a lot of the mid-tier fraternities actually weren't really that into me. But for some reason, Sigma Chi, which is a lot, it's a pretty. I mean, you can do some research on it. It's a pretty. It's considered one of the harder ones to get into. They very much they like me right off the bat, and so they were talking to me, and they actually wanted me to stop going to other meet and greets with it, because there was like a few still had one or two, and they wanted me to stop going to meet and greets uh with the with other ones. They said, hey, come on. And so I ended up, I got a message the next day. It said, come down to the they had an off-campus house as well. Come down to it, and all the guys that are there, we're going to take you guys to the mansion, and we got something for you guys. That's how they said it. And we go there, and basically what happens is, this is how it works. If you're somebody they don't want, and you're coming, because they're not, a lot of, at bigger schools, some of these fraternities will tell you, hey, we don't want you, you don't have the look, we're not going to take you. Um, and they'll tell you straight up. And I've even heard stories where they'll kind of kick you out. At my university, it was, I would say, maybe a little bit more crueler. They wouldn't tell you that. They'd let you keep coming out. I mean, you could come out until the last day. But what they did is, the people that they were going to recruit and they were going to keep, they said, come to this off-campus house. We got something for you. And they'd load us in trucks and vehicles, and they'd drive us off towards the mansion. And then if you didn't get that text, then you're just going to kind of show up and you weren't going to get anything. And they pulled us out one by one. I'm just standing. I was just standing in the corner drinking a Mountain Dew. Because there's no alcohol during that period. They can't have alcohol around the in the mansion during formal events. So I'm just drinking a Mountain Dew. They pulled me to the back in the mansion. They said, hey, we like your look, we like what you are, and they gave me like a slick envelope that had the Sigma Chi emblem and had my name in it. And they said, be here tomorrow, dress very nicely, and and that was the end of it. And you go there the next day and you wear a fancy suit, and uh, and basically you're in. And so that was kind of my first experience with that. And that again is kind of a perplexing thing with me, because you can see in that scenario in of itself, I was potentially passed over by a lot of lower tier situations. And I want to make one thing clear. A lot of people probably think, watching this, that I might have been a token. That's something I considered myself. Did they want me to be the token black guy? But the funny thing about it was, in that fraternity, there were two very, very black people that were from the St. Louis area, actually the Ferguson area, the Ferguson riots. And they were always in basketball jerseys. Like, they'd be wearing like Lakers, or Miami Heat, and very, very black guys. I mean, I really didn't care, because the connections were good with it. So I didn't really care if I was a token or not. I did think about that, maybe I was a token. The interesting thing though is, um, the short time I was with them, that really didn't fly. They really wanted me to look really good. And another interesting thing about it was is with those big fraternities, they have different classes within them. So you'll have your party animals that host kind of the big parties, the big bangs, and they're degenerates. They're awful people. A lot of them are really really awful people. They're not fun to be around. And then you'll have kind of more your well and groomed people that are wearing, they're in the administrations of the fraternity. They're almost like kind of secret society people. They go to all the big meetings and things like that. And then you have some of your tokens that are just kind of there. And then you have people that they originally thought they wanted, and then they were like, oh, this, but they're just kind of there. So even within that system, there's still different echelons of it. And so that was kind of my first experience. Do you have any questions or anything?
So essentially, the fraternity thing was a big part of your quote unquote ascension.
No, no, no. It actually didn't do anything for me. I didn't get initiated. I was a pledge, and they actually kicked me out as a pledge because I actually got in a lot. I shit the bed there too. There was a guy I really didn't get along with, and I got pissed drunk at one of our bashes, and I basically said, I said, dude, this is all I said. I didn't hit him. I didn't do anything animalistic. I just said, dude, you are an effing asshole. I said, you are. And I didn't realize how much power he did. Apparently, he made a huge stink. I mean, a huge stink. And like a few days later, they're like, "Yeah, man, like we can't keep you. We gotta take it away." And they were actually so pissed about that situation. They were very very upset that there's a few of the fraternities that were there, that like Pike and a few other big powerhouses that were going to take me after that with the spring, and they were wanting to take me on, and then all of a sudden at the invite only dinner or whatever, there'd be like a nail, they'd be like we, and basically I found out through informants and people that I knew within that system that basically I had kind of been blackballed. They were very upset with me, and it actually was a huge social setback. What I want you to take from that is it really didn't do anything for me in of itself, but the reason I talked about that experience specifically is you can see how in that scenario I really didn't do anything. I happened to stumble upon the dude at the gym. I just happened to stumble upon him, and next thing you know, I'm getting invited to have chili at the mansion, or to go and I hadn't been to any. Keep in mind, I didn't go to one. I hadn't been to one of their parties. I hadn't been to one of their rush events. I literally I hadn't I they didn't know me. They just basically they liked the way I looked. They liked the thing, and that's how it happened. And so that was kind of, I would say, the fraternity thing. I didn't get a lot of it out of it in of itself, but it kind of taught me kind of the power of just kind of how a lot of things work, and how there's not really. I thought it was a very kind of something you'd be interested in hearing, because it's a very kind of animalistic kind of. We like the look, and that's all we care about. We'll deal with the rest later. And they actually, you'll find this funny enough, they actually end up kicking a lot of people out. I found out that there was a lot of guys that basically fell in the same trap I did. They were, they thought they were good looking guys, or they came from wealthy families in the area or whatever, and they were just complete assholes, or they just couldn't get along with anybody else. And I actually heard, because I kept in touch with some people, I actually heard that they had to kick a lot of dudes out because they basically fell in the same trap I did, where they really liked them and they looked like they belonged, but they didn't, and they ended up getting kicked out. So that was something I found out long after, that was actually something that was pretty common over there, that they were having to do a lot. So
Yeah. Now, but now you're pretty well set up in life, and you seem to have discovered I guess, a talent for engineering, based on what you've said. Uh,
uh,
what you said, I mean, what exactly was responsible in your opinion for the difference in academic performance, university versus in high school?
uh, just the situation. I mean, after I got kicked out of Sigma Chi, I mean, my social life, it was a huge setback as well. It was kind of like the high school thing. It was another setback. And I was like, well, I'm already at university, and my grandparents started. I got good enough grades the first semester to say, hey, keep it up, we'll keep paying for it, yada 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 yada. And so I just kind of took advantage of the moment. And that is something that you might be very disappointed with this interview. Is that part of the reason I wanted to do this interview is that I very much am kind of probably in line with this community in terms of there's really nothing. I'm very much. If I'll be honest with you, Thinking-Ape, I'm just a guy. I'm very average. I'm just a guy. But the halo effect and just kind of like the cut of my look and just kind of these things, I get put into this. I'll even tell you an example I had with calc-based physics. I just told you. But I just told you I passed it. I The professor dropped all late because there's only like it's such a high level class. There's only like 10 people in the class, and he dropped all late work penalties. He said, "Just turn the shit in. I don't care." He's like, "I'm dropping all late work penalties. You can turn something in that was due in January, and you can possibly get full credit on it based on the obviously how good it is." So he dropped all late penalties. I I've had a lot going on with this house with the renovation. I've been driving all over town, having to do stuff. So I wasn't. A lot of people actually weren't showing up to class for a large section. I was that as well. And I went to him right after our final, and I said, "You're gonna let me turn in this stuff, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, just have it in by Friday." This was Monday. And I said, all right. I said, so I can turn this in, right? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm glad. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear you're going to turn it in. Never mind the fact that the shit was due a long time ago, but it is a lot. It's like 15 page. It's like 15 page. It's literally like a full time job. They're like 15-page lab reports, and you got other classes. So I just didn't have time to mess with them. So I did them all last minute. I did them like Friday. I did them like that Friday night, and that Saturday morning actually passed the deadline. And he ended up grading them all. But basically, I mean, I think that after this, after we talk about my personal experiences, there is a theory I have on with my engineering because I am almost done with it. I'm like over 90% done with it. So I don't have the degree yet, so I don't quite have as you probably don't want to hold my opinion in an insanely high regard because I'm not done with the degree yet, but I am far enough along that I've taken a lot of really hard courses and passed them. But like I passed Calc 3, differential equations, all those hard level classes. Um, but the thing is I have a theory of how this all works. But what I'm really kind of getting the gist of with my high school and college experiences, and I'm starting to kind of fit in now, where I'm learning how to kind of talk the talk and sort of walk the walk. Turn the stuff in, do a good job. Actually put the time in. But something that you'll really know in my high school and college experiences, if I'm going to humble myself is that the fascinating thing about these last 8 years of my life is that I've never really fit in into what they've been trying to get me to be, and that's kind of the fascinating point. So if you have any questions along those lines, if you want any specifics before we move on or anything, feel free to. I don't mind if you interrogate me or whatever. But that's just kind of the general gist of it.
Hmm. Well, so would you say at this stage that you're sort of comfortable in your skin, even if it's somewhat artificial, that the past that you've experienced and the negatives and I mean I guess the obstacles at this stage you've quote unquote ascended and that these problems are basically in the past and you're just ready to sort of move on and you've figured it out more or less.
I, I'm trying to think because I don't. My whole theory on this is my whole theory on everything I said is that I think that a lot of people need to understand that I think what's hard for a lot of people to understand is I've seen kind of behind the scenes, so to speak, on a lot of things. I've seen behind the scenes of money. My grandfather, like I said, he's not like Bill Gates wealthy by any means, but I've been around a lot of doctors, lawyers, wealthy people, and I've been around a lot of upper echelons people. I've seen it all pretty much. I'm pretty much kind of desensitized to a lot of that. Hell, I just got I just got approved at 23 for an American Express Platinum card. So I mean, and that was an American Psycho. That was like what they were cutting up cocaine with. So I'm pretty much desensitized to a lot of that stuff. So the reason I kind of wanted to do this interview was not to puff out my chest and say, "Oh, I've been through this." It was more to kind of I wanted to kind of enlighten people to say that I think a lot of what ascension and a lot of these things is really not it's not really fully what you are intrinsically. A lot of it is kind of, um, do you have the look? Do you have do people want to invest in you? Do people want to groom you? Do people think that, do people, like, I'll give you an instance, like my landlord. So my landlord is one of the nicer ones in town. He basically buys kind of not dilapidated houses, but older houses and completely redoes them. Puts new HVAC, new piping, new sinks, new everything. That's why he's doing a big renovation on my house. And he is very much kind of what you call kind of like this mainstream kind of cool dude. He's only in his late 30s, early 40s. His name is Jay. Very kind of just laid back, kind of swagger guy. And I don't think he much liked me when I first moved in, and I'm the only one living in my house right now. And and I kind of learned. I started. A lot of people avoid their landlords like the plague. I did the exact opposite. I started. If I ever had a little problem, I'd go up there and I would basically quote unquote pay my respects. I'd say, hey, I have a little problem. I just thought I'd let you know, and I don't want to. I feel bad, and just things like that. And it would it 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 pays off because the other day they let me. So my landlord is known for kind of, he's a little bit more of a harsher landlord in terms of, he's a little bit more stingent in terms of what he's comfortable with. He's not a they would be kind of considered kind of like a big corporate landlord, quote unquote, even though he's not. It's kind of a cold facade company, so to speak. But I've noticed that through that kind of that BSing, I have a good rapport with them. So if I ever have to borrow a tool or something, I have no problem doing that. If I ever need anything done, it's immediately done. Where sometimes I've heard you can be put on a list for 3, 4, 5 days because they have like over like 40 houses. If I ever need anything done, it's immediately done. If I and like I had a thermostat issue, it was fixed within the hour. So I've learned that it's better for me just to kind of embrace what people give me and what people think of me, and just become that rather than fight it and say no, 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 no. Hey, I wasn't brought up like this. It's like, well, it doesn't. And I think that's something that really holds people back, because you see a lot of these people, especially boomers. You see this all the time. Like, well, my dad kicked me out at 16, so you need to be out at 16. And I think that a lot of people, they can't really get past this past trauma or what they were brought up to be. And what I've learned is I had an opportunity for people to invest in me, and I kind of shit the bed in high school. And with my fraternity, I completely admit it. I have regrets over it. It keeps me up sometimes at night. But I also understood that it was a learning experience, and that I wasn't groomed to be that guy. And so it's better for me to try to be that guy, and kind of be that guy, not fully, and to get perks at it, because those rewards. See, I think that a lot of people, their life experiences, a lot of people, especially adults, right? A lot of people have negative adult experiences or childhood experiences, whatever, because one, a lot of people want to be known, and a lot of people are kind of, they're either on the fringe class, or they're just there. You go into any business or any school, most people are just there, or they're kind of their fringe class. And I think that my experiences, if I were to really be to humble myself and say what I've really learned from it is that I think that a lot of what's happened to me wasn't me. It was the circumstances changed me to the point of where I said, you know what, you know, I can no longer think like I'm on the fringe class, or like I'm just there. I have to kind of own up to whatever people see in me, whatever that is. and I should just run with it because a lot of people don't get the opportunity with it, and a lot of people are miserable because they're just and that's one like my mom. My mom, one of the things that she'll complain is you know Michelle, who's the daughter that went to medical school, they got a lot of praise and everybody said, "Oh, she's really smart," and we see something in her, and my mom didn't get that. And my mom is still resentful about it. It's why she burned a lot of bridges, and I think that is really kind of the bigger, whether people want to admit it or not. I think that if you really look behind the scenes of a lot of things, that's kind of what a lot of it is. A lot of people want to be known for one, and people also they don't really want to be on the fringe class. And I think a lot of people don't even really want to be mainstream, so to speak. They want to ascend. And I just think that one of the reasons why I'm not a saint by any means. I think one of the reasons why I've had a lot of people say, Trace, you seem pretty pretty I've even had family say you're not more upset about what happened to you with your mom, you're not more upset about how you were treated when you were pre-puberty or whatever. And I say, no, because things have just kind of worked out for me because I've kind of I've embraced kind of the rapport relations. I've replaced kind of sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and you have to live up to what people want you to do, and you have to give some to get some. And I know it's a little Machiavellian, a little Renaissance for a lot of people. A lot of people don't like to think like that. Maybe a little 1980s Manhattan-esque, American Psycho. But that's just kind of how a lot of this stuff works. And until you have a completely redefinition of society, that's the way it's going to continue to be. And so I feel like a lot of people they're in self perpetually misery because and don't get me wrong, a lot of people don't get to the point where I'm at, where like you said, have a double engineering degree almost. I'm not trying to give one of those like those like those red pill tutorials of like ascend like this. But I think that people have to be honest with themselves and say, this is kind of what it is. And I think that through my data and me processing things, that's kind of what I've seen. Does that make any sense, or do you have any qualms with
I
that? Or
No, it makes sense. People work with the systems that are available to them, and I don't think anyone's really a saint. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
okay, so I want to kind of move on before we got to go. I want to move on to something that I think that because I know I've just talked mostly this whole it's kind of made me a little uncomfortable, to be honest with you. I feel kind of bad, but there is something that I think that you could debate me on, and that you might find very interesting. Your audience might find it interesting. Is that through my study of engineering, this is where I think society is going, and this is where I think that you are point on. If I'll be honest with you, you are point on about a lot of societal flaws. I am a big fan of. I think that a lot of the guests you've had where they talked about, like I forget who it was, but you guys were talking about if the auto mechanic, the big hotshot auto mechanic, got killed in New York and he got hit by a bus, there'd be 70 guys to replace him tomorrow. And how a lot of those 1800s, early 1900s social structures of, you can be kind of just a normal person, but you can have an important job in the community, like a milkman or a mail, and you still have some value. Where today that's kind of gone, and that's where you're getting a lot of these kind of maybe these doomer-esque kind of things. I completely agree. I completely agree with a lot of what you say about that. The only thing I would say, and this is something that again is probably a little controversial, but through my experiences and my processing of data and my situation, is that I don't think we're actually heading towards what you think we are. In fact, I actually think, and this is going to sound asinine, I understand. I actually think that globalism and a lot of the things that are happening right now are actually pretty good for us, and that and I'm not even considering my ethnicity in this when I say this. We should not go back to a 1950s structure. I mean, take out the biracial. If I was fully white, I would think the same thing. And I'm looking at that from an economic standpoint and just kind of a livelihood standpoint. I think that the issue with today that we have, and why a lot of people are unhappy with the technology and things like that, is what it is society is being pushed towards a type 1 society. I don't know how familiar you are with that.
You talk about the
It's a lot of
Kardashev scale. Is that what you're referring to?
yes, 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 a type one
I,
society.
I, I, well, I think most people would guess we're sort of a 0.65, and I think we'll never get to type one. We're done,
Yeah,
but that's a separate discussion. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But um, with my what's happening is what's happening is we're either the doomer aspect of this is it's either we can either accept a we can go into like a Roman fall again, which I think we'll survive. But the problem is, I think the only way that we have a Roman fall is through nuclear weapons, and I'll get into that in a second. And the way I look at this is it's very based on how things have to be. Um, if that makes any sense. So if that scenario were to happen, there's only very limited ways it could happen, and
I,
pretty much it would have to be a nuclear
I'm
holocaust.
not, yeah, but I'm not an advocate in any way, shape, or form of we're in the sort of the throes of some Romanesque great
No,
fall.
no, 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 no. What I'm explaining is that a lot of people are unhappy right now, right? And you've explained that
Yeah,
a lot of people are unhappy with technology and Tinder and all these things. These things are a blessing in disguise because what they're doing is I am not a communist by I actually I'm very much I would call myself a progressive Republican, so I'm like kind of like Teddy Roosevelt or Dwight D. Eisenhower or even like FDR. Basically, I believe that economics is the bottom line. I believe that everything's based on economics. You look at look at the slave trade, right? Africa, hell, you had black people selling to other black people because it benefited their tribes, and that's how slavery started. And obviously, the Civil War happened because the South was completely agriculturally based, and they said if you take away our slaves, literally we are going to like our economy is going to be nothing. And that's what happened. That's why the South is still in a large part a shithole. And that's why there was a lot of, the Ku Klux Klan started because there's a lot of resentment because they said, well, we're poor because, the slaves have been freed. And obviously, black people were soft targets. So even these real delicate issues that a lot of people really kind of don't want to talk about, and they say, oh, that's too, a lot of these are actually economically based, and it's a lot of it's just kind of real bottom line. And so what I would call myself is kind of a progressive Republican, where I think that the bottom line is always the most important thing because it controls basically every facet of life. It determines where you sleep at, where you take a dump at, where you go to school at, what you're going to drive, who you're going to interact with. It completely determines every facet of your life. Um, but what's happening today is, and you'll notice this with technology, is there's a breakdown of culture and social barriers. And a lot of people, it makes them uncomfortable. But it's actually a really good thing. And it's actually kind of the way things are meant to happen. Because what a lot of people don't understand is things happen the way they happen for an exact reason. So the reason in the 1860 or like for instance, I was actually watching a documentary on it, and again, I'm not trying to make race a main issue. This is just a good example. Slavery was on the way out in America because it took so many slaves for cotton to be picked. I mean, I think it was something like one slave could pick 2 pounds of cotton a day. And so it was very inefficient. But then the cotton gin, the machine, Eli Whitney, what he invented, came out. And that was when it became useful to have slaves. And so that's when the slave in America it boomed again in the 18 I believe the 1830s, the late 1830s up until the Civil War. And so because of that one technological advancement, the entire social structure was completely redefined. And so this happens, but you couldn't go back to the 1830s. Like a lot of people would say, well, what if this happened differently? Well, if that happened differently, it would be a complete domino effect, and we probably wouldn't even have a certain problem to begin with. If you took modern technologies back to the 1830s, today it would be a completely different situation. So my point is I think that a lot of people, these people that they're saying, things were better in the past and we should go back to the past and things like that. The past was never going to stay the past. The reason things happened was because there was a certain environment, there was a certain situation that existed. And due to technological advancements and growth, that was replaced by a new kind of era. And that era defines how people interact, how people deal with each other, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that it's a dangerous idea that a lot of people maybe in your community have. They say, man, things were better back then, and all these, and I think that a lot of people they miss the bigger picture of, well, this is kind of the way things had to happen. I mean, when you got these technological advancements with the Cold War, they weren't going to stop with color TV. They weren't going to stop with the microwave. They weren't going to stop with that because that's not how things work. Things constantly progress, and they're supposed to get easier and easier and easier and easier with time until there's a big political or big fallout that basically stops it, as we saw with the Romans. And that is something that I think a lot of people intrinsically don't understand is that you can't, that everything is happening within the confines of its particular situation. And that's going to determine how anything functions. And I think a lot of people they unnecessarily frustrate themselves and and you see it in politics all the time. Like it's like, well, you can't go back to the 1950s because we have too much technology. I mean, we can't go back to the 1950s coal mine and the iron mill. I mean, there's some uses for that. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with it, but things have progressed past that, and so you can't. It doesn't make sense to try to recreate the 1950s now. Again, I'm not talking about racially. I'm just talking about economically in everyday life. It doesn't make sense to try to do that because that's not the era we're in.
I mean, I don't really
Okay.
disagree with any of that.
Uh huh. Uh
I
huh.
mean, I've never advocated for some sort of, I mean, I don't know how much of my content you've seen, but I've never advocated for a return to the past. I don't think the past was necessarily better in really too many regards, if any, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, I mean, we're stuck in the present. There's nothing I really have to disagree with you on that, if that's the point. Yeah.
Oh, no, no, I didn't. No, so I didn't mean it. I know that's not. So I guess the reason I said that is there's a lot of the especially coming from America right now. There's a lot of political strife right now, as you know, and a lot of that I feel like is tied is a lot of it is tied. And there's a lot of people in a lot of these communities that talk about kind of the, especially within like MGTOW and certain communities like that, like the past, things like that. I know that's not something you necessarily advocate, but we just have to. I think that when we're really looking at kind of like the black pill and looking at what it is that basically what's happening is these social norms have been broken down to where we have a lot of freedoms that we've never had before, which allow people to kind of act on those freedoms. But at the same time, that is not going to last forever. What the next step is, so this is my theory on what's going to happen, and this is probably where you might disagree with me. What's going to happen is, or at least what I think should happen, but I think this is actually probably where we're going to get happen is we're going to go into a very, very globalized world, which I know is something you've talked about before, and something that I think, if I'm correct, you're not a huge fan of. That's kind of why I was talking a little bit about globalism and Type 1 society. But there is a lot of positives to that because um, there really is no way. So a lot of these social problems that we have, if we ever to get close to a Type 1 society or to get into it, um, I actually think Type 1 might be achievable. I think Type 2 is probably too far for humans. I don't see us ever having the technology to be Type 2. That's where you can do obviously intergalaxy travel and things like that. I think that's a little far fetched. I could see a Type 1 happening, but I think that the thing that people have to understand is that a lot of these issues that we see today and that make people kind of uncomfortable is we're going through a massive transition period where we're basically kind of a lot of racial economic lines, basically social economical in any sense, are getting broken down because in the 1950s, America especially, I'm from America, I know you're originally from America. People don't understand that after World War II, Europe and Asia were completely decimated, and America was the lone dog. And so it was easy for America to be this great powerhouse. And And people ever since the 80s, they've been saying we've been losing our power or our prestige. Well, it's naturally going to happen because the very environments outside of our control, other countries, I guess they're not technically out of our control. We could start wars, but it would not be in our best interest. Um, that is dictating how much share of the pie America has, for example, with these things. And where this kind of boils down to your content is that those forces, those overlying forces of globalism and things like that, they are impacting people in an everyday. And a lot of people you'll notice they'll say life is bleak today. They don't, it's too mechanical, it's too whatever. But I think that a lot of people they I think it would help a lot of people to kind of understand why these things are happening and how even today things are going to continue to progress. And I actually think they'll get easier for people in time. I just think right now it's very uncomfortable because there's a huge breakdown of old values, old culture, old ways, and it's being replaced with more of a globalized system. So instead of your local culture that you had in your small town or whatever, everybody has a smartphone today. Everybody has not everybody, but a lot of people have Twitter, Tinder, Facebook, and that's your new culture, and it's becoming a globalized culture. And it's uncomfortable in the moment because you're like, wow, things are changing very fast, and I'm having to, my identity is going to have to change. But it could potentially be very beneficial because it's going to force it's going to basically be a natural forced way of people to one interact with each other in maybe a way they would have never done before, across social, economic, racial lines. But also, it's kind of a reset thing as well because it's kind of like, well, like I think the Tinder thing, I think those things are not going to last. If I'll be honest with you, I think what's going to happen is I think that the black pill actually probably a lot of people say, when's this going to end? Is this going to keep happening forever? Or dude's going to keep getting I don't think it can. I don't think it can last forever. In fact, my theory is right now, what's happening is we're getting an explosion of animalistic desire because we've never had the ability in the past to express it due to social norms. Ever since Roman times, Romans were pretty. There were some pretty degenerate times in the Roman era, but for a long time, humans, due to social norms, the church and things like that, were never able to really express these desires. And that's something a lot of people talk about. And I think a lot of people are releasing this, but I think that people learn very quickly on the fly. And I think that in 50, 60, 70 years, I think that there's going to be a completely different. We're going to either keep progressing more towards a type 1 society, which means basically forced globalism, culture mixing, um, basically the breakdown of kind of a lot of our issues that we have in the current moment because you're going to be forced to interact and to coincide, or you're going to basically probably have to you're going to have to deal with some kind of collapse of society, which I don't really know how you have that without a nuclear holocaust because I don't see people just saying, you know what, screw phones and TVs. Um, I'm done with this. I don't see a movement like that. I think the only way you get a Roman fall is through a nuclear holocaust, or we progress to a type 1 society, and you're forced to through technology. Like technology is going to force us to have to adapt. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Sure, sure, yeah.
I just didn't know if there's any arguments, if you thought that that was a bad point or a bad take or what you're.
I don't whether whether a person thinks it's good or not, I think is immaterial because there are all sorts of things in life that you might not consider good, but they happen nonetheless. I mean, you get cancer, it's not good, but you still have to deal with the circumstances and facts of potentially having cancer. Whether or not
Oh,
globalization or forced globalization, however it's framed, is a good thing, is, as I just said, immaterial. The world is being subjected to it. It is the culture of the day, and despite people's protestations and lamentations, I just ultimately you have to roll with the punches. It might not be good, and maybe the opposition is correct about it, but nonetheless, it is the state of affairs as we know it today. And frankly, I don't see any way out of that. The only minor quip I have is I don't think we'll ever get to a type 1 civilization. I'm not an expert on this, but I have looked into things like the Kardashev scale, and my understanding of it is basically at that level, you have full utilization of all the resources of your local star, i.e., the sun. I deeply skeptical of the idea that we will ever completely harness the power of the sun to that degree. So yeah, I think we won't make it that far. That said, yes, the general direction is globalization, more and more technological invasion in our personal lives, and yeah, there's not much you can do about that. So you just kind of accept it, roll the punches. But look, there are things you can do as well. I think if you really don't like it, you can find, particularly in the United States, in wide open spaces. Move to the middle of nowhere in South or North Dakota. No one will bother you there, probably for quite some time. Those options exist, but then of course you have to forsake other things. But yeah, I'm not. Ultimately, I'm an observer. I don't. I mean, there are things I like and don't like, but I tend to observe and commentate on the things that are happening. But yeah, ultimately, whether you like it or not, these things are happening. We just have to deal with it.
Well, the thing about the Type One society, this is something that these types of societies are actually not very well defined. Type one, I believe, if you research it when you have time again, I know you have in the past. It's basically control over your immediate solar system. Type two is your galaxy, and then three is the multiverse, the multi-universe. Basically like basically we could get out of the Milky Way. Is type three. Um, Now the thing about type one is, yes, that is a bit of a that's a bit of an undefined area, and everything I've researched, it's not super well defined. I don't think that was actually even the main point of. Basically, the main point was the more control you have over your immediate environment, the more godlike your society will be. If you're type three, you might as well be God until the universe collapses because you can do anything you want. You can manipulate star matter. You can travel within galaxies. You can basically manipulate planets so that you could theoretically control gravity, so you could make a planet that was inhabitable. You could actually make it like Earth because you could get it within a certain proximity of the sun. You could manipulate anything all day, every day. Of course, you'd never be God because we can't actually create something out of nothing. That will always be our biggest limitation. But you basically, I think the whole idea of the type society is how close do you get to fundamentally being like God? With type one, it's a bit weird because I actually don't think that in type one you would have complete control of your star. That would be probably more type two, where you can travel within your galaxy, because the whole idea is how much power you need to do that. Like the sun has everything comes from the sun, nuclei synthesis, and I'm not going to get into that, but I don't want to sound like a giant nerd on here. But everything basically comes from the sun. We know that. And so basically, the more control over you have over sun matter, obviously, the more control you'll have over propulsion and all those things. And black holes, we think, come from a huge star possibly erupting, and it just puts a giant hole in space time. So basically, stars and suns are like the end all be all for everything. So I don't necessarily think a Type One would have that much control over a sun. You probably would have some gravitational manipulation, meaning you could, um, like one of the big ideas is you'd be able to slingshot yourself using the sun's gravity. So like you could throw yourself into its gravity, and you'd be able to calculate it. It's thrusting you basically you would be using the sun as much as you can without having actual like complete control over it. But obviously that's not very well defined. My whole point was essentially that us we're gonna it's kind of like calculus. I don't know if you've ever taken calculus, but basically when you're on a derivative line, right? When you're having a derivative, you're getting closer and closer and closer and closer to zero, but you never reach it because you're on an infinite line. Basically, you get closer and closer and closer, but you're never going to really reach it. So I think the thing with type one is it's like, or whatever type two, type three, whatever you think the limit is either we're going to face our demise, or we're going to face a major setback. So we either face extinction, a major setback, or we get infinitely closer to these new this basically what I'm getting at is these things are inevitable. Either we're going to go down, we're going to destroy ourselves, or you're going to get infinitely closer to that society, whether you think it's possible or not, because it's inevitable. That's just how progress works. You can't tell people, you know what, we have enough technology. You're not going to get the world to become Amish. You're not going to get the world to say, hey, let's go back to 1990. We had the internet just came out, and we had all this stuff, and we can just kind of stay here and we could just kind of hang out here, and we don't have to, it's not going to overtake our everyday lives. That's not how things work. I know you know that. I know you know that, but that it's basically what I'm getting at is you really can't stop that. And I think that's where a lot of politics and a lot of people go crazy. It's like, how do I stop this trend? How can I stop the clock? It's kind of like aging. A lot of people are like, well, I want to stop at 21, 22. It's like me. I'm going to be 24. I'm enjoying the last couple of days of me being in my early 20s. But it's like you can't stop the clock. You can't stop that. And so that's kind of my whole point is there's this natural progression that is kind of it's beyond our control. And there really, unless you want to face total destruction or like a 2,000, 3,000 year setback, it's like, well, we kind of have to roll with the punches here. And so that was kind of my point. And another people, what a lot of people will say is they'll say, well, Trace, that's true, but we could change it up a little bit. We could change how things interact or whatever or whatever. And this is something that might be very controversial, but I don't think that's possible. So when a lot of people say what ifs, right? A lot of people say, this is how things could be. This is how things could have turned out. What they're actually talking about is a parallel universe. So what I mean by this is our society is basically it's a domino effect. Everything has a cause and effect. And you can't just say, well, what if we change this effect? It's like, well, there was a cause there. There was a cause that caused that to, that would be like me saying, what if my mother was a better mother? Well, that would mean she'd have to be raised completely differently, and she probably wouldn't have had me to
Yes,
begin with.
causality determined. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yes, exactly. And so there's really no. I think it's a dangerous thing that a lot of people say. Well, what if we just slightly altered this or altered that? Like, no, you can't. You're talking about a parallel universe where there's a completely different cause and effect.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I totally agree. We're stuck where we're stuck. Absolutely. 100%.
Well, I don't like that. I think that if I'll be honest with you, I think that the reason why this is kind of a maybe a shitty time in the grand scheme of things to be alive is that we're being forced to go. My whole point is it's really it's a forced transition period because you went from the 50s and 60s. You went from kind of a lot of hey, you know, uh, kind of a lot of these really defined social norms, these really defined ways of life because that was what was beneficial in the past. To overnight, you have the feminist movement. To you have kind of the Cold War coming to an end. You have all the internet, all these major transition periods that are redefining life. And so what I'm getting at is I think we're in kind of a shockwave right now where 100, 200, 300 years from now, either we're completely destroyed or we've kind of resolved what's happening now naturally. But it's very uncomfortable to live in this time right now because the transition is just something you can't avoid. There's a cause and effect to everything, and somebody's going to have to, be in the middle of it. And I think that that's kind of why this period specifically is probably not going to be a fun one. Like I don't expect until probably if I live that long, hopefully. But if you never know. I could get killed on my way home today. I could get killed in the car wreck. But if I live to my 60s, early 70s, I don't think until then a lot of these things will start to kind of get resolved and things will settle down because you're having a huge redefinition of the way people live. But it's actually almost completely tied to technology. It's like women, like everybody says, like, well, women, they don't need a man. as a provider and this and that. Well, why was that? Well, it was because women, due to birth control, things like that, women could go in the workforce more easily. Due to the economics, inflation, the woman needed to work so they could have. There's several environmental factors of why that is. But I think a lot of people they want to look at one little point in time, one little speck, and they want to say this is where it all went wrong, or like we should have done something differently in this time. And I think that's a very dangerous thought because I don't think that's how life or how things actually work. I think everything it's a domino effect, and there's seismic waves that are beyond our control, and we can't understand that are manipulating the way things are, and that's just the way it is.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. No, I wasn't trying to get in an argument with you. I just wanted to kind of that was kind of my take on just kind of how things are moving and what and I think that was a little bit of a white pill because I think that a lot of people unnecessarily they beat themselves up and they say you know uh, if things could have been, just slightly different or, this and that. And it's like, well, I don't think things would ever be slightly different. I think things happened exactly the way they were going to happen. And there really was no way of you controlling that. That's like if I were to go back to high school right now and I were to say one different word to one different person, would that have changed my life? Probably. I don't think I wouldn't have even said it because I that's not I wouldn't have been in that place at time. There's things out of our control that are manipulating these things that it's not even worth our time to say, maybe should, that's just not how things work.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was just my take on it, from my experience with engineering and just things like that. That was kind of my grand take on what I think is happening. But I thought you might find it interesting, and maybe your audience would. And I didn't know if you'd have any qualms with it, and you'd think anything was wrong or anything.
I
But
mean, I never made a secret. You know, I'm a determinist, and I think we're stuck with the way things are. I don't think, I don't believe in notions of free will, and ultimately, I believe we're puppets of the universe. So yeah, I don't really disagree with any of that. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess it gives you some comfort, anyways.
uh, I don't know if it gives me comfort. It just, I think it accords with the observable data. Really, ultimately, I wouldn't say it's particularly comforting. I mean, I don't. To me, the idea of a sort of indeterminate system is incomprehensible. I don't really know what people mean when they talk about it. It's just like saying, well, effectively, they're saying that there's some factor in their lives that's acausal. But then I think, well, what does that even mean? I don't. Maybe it's a limitation of my imagination, but I'm not really sure what people mean when they believe, essentially, are talking about acausality and somehow that them being involved in that chain of acausality. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So no, I think we're just stuck with the way things are, and the only thing you can do is roll with the punches with the gifts or the lack of gifts you've been given. So
Have you I don't mean to make this call so long, so feel free to just cut me off anytime, but I am interested on what your thing is with this is that um this is kind of taking it back to me for a moment, but I think that this is kind of an interesting thing. Have you ever studied anybody? I'm sure you have. You ever studied Pope Alexander the Sixth?
if I ever studied him in particular, no, I cannot claim that. No.
Well, how this is related is this is kind of fascinating. And this is kind of interesting. Is he actually had a lot of control over how the world turned out? So actually, the way Brazil and So everybody thinks Brazil speaks Spanish. Obviously, it's Portuguese because
I
the
don't know
Portuguese.
who is everybody thinks. I don't know
Well,
anyone
you
who
know what I
thinks
mean. That's
Brazil.
the mainstream always like, oh, well, and everybody has to correct. You know what I mean? Like, there's always that correction of like, no,
I
Brazil does.
I am not familiar with people who actually think Brazilians speak Spanish, but I suppose these people exist. Sure, why not?
Yeah, no, I've met a lot of people that think Brazil speaks Spanish. Trust me,
Yep.
that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. But what's important is if you look at the map of South America. I almost said South Africa. I don't know why, but South America. The way Brazil and the rest of South America is split was actually because of him, because he was from Spain, and this relates to the topic I'm going to get to in a minute. I'm just talking about how important he was in history. And the Spanish came to him and they said, hey, you're a Spaniard. You come from, I can't pronounce the town. It starts with an X. It's a very hard town to pronounce. But it basically was right on the Mediterranean coast on the eastern part of Spain. And they said, hey, you're a Spanish Pope. He was actually one of only two. His uncle was the other. Um, and they said, help us out. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to split South America in half, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's why Chile, Peru, Colombia, Argentina, those were all Spanish colonies. And why that big landmass that's Brazil, that I guess Portugal could have split it up, but they decided not to, was Portugal. He literally just split it right down the map. And he was the one that funded Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and it literally, I mean, he was that impactful. The interesting thing about him was he actually almost not single-handedly, because there was corrupt popes after him, but he actually pretty much was the start of the Protestant Reformation. He basically was so bad. Now, of course, a lot of these are exaggerated stories because he had a lot of political enemies, but in the time he was considered so corrupt that he was actually a big leader to the Protestant Reformation. So he had a huge, whether you like it or not, he actually, I wouldn't say he had Adolf Hitler, Julius Caesar effect, but he was pretty much up there. We were actually in my honors history class in high school, we actually learned a lot about the dude because he was that impactful in the Renaissance period. Um, and the interesting thing about him is he was actually in his youth, if you read about him, he was described as very handsome, very fit, very well spoken, very kind of had all the features you wanted about him. And the funny thing about the dude is he had a wonderful way with money and women. Every historical account you read about him, but everybody said, man, he was a shitty man for the clergy. He was not meant for it. He was way too secular. He loved sleeping with women, had several illegitimate kids. He actually got, after his uncle died, his uncle ascended him to vice chancellor, which was the second most powerful position in the Catholic Church. After his uncle died, the first Spanish pope, um, I forget the pope that came after him, but he basically got in good graces with that pope and was allowed to actually stay as that powerful position. And in fact, he actually got in trouble for having orgies. They think it was never proven, but he actually got the pope after his uncle actually publicly made a big deal out of him because they thought he was having orgies, hosting orgy parties.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing about this dude is by the time he became pope, he was actually very popular with the Roman people. I wouldn't say he was considered a man of the people, so to speak, but he was a very popular kind of pope. But he he uh, he was bad. I mean, for that role. I'm not judging his morality, but for what he was, what the definition of what you're supposed to be for the position he was in, he was a bad fit for it. And he ended up really shitting the bed. He actually is accused of poisoning several cardinals, and he had a huge negative impact on things. In fact, after he died, his son Cesare was arrested by the Spanish police, or not Spanish, but he was arrested by the Spaniards because they think
Yeah.
basically his uncle or his dad, Pope Alexander VI, screwed over
Okay.
Spain, and so that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But the reason I think this is relevant is there's all is somebody that impactful, right, on our everyday life. The way South America is defined, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, all funded by this dude, was one of the popes that really led up to the Protestant Reformation. In fact, the Pope that followed him said there's no point praying for the dude because he's in hell. He said there's no point praying for the damned. It's crazy to me to see that his ascension was mainly due to, these things such as good looks, and really that's like a big thing that people always talk about, is he just was really kind of a popular dude, but he just was such a bad fit for what he was molded into. And I don't I kind of relate to him in a way, not to the I'll never be that powerful. So like I definitely don't. That's not my. Don't worry, I don't have a. I'm not like, oh, I'll be that powerful, but I kind of relate to him in a way. But the fascinating thing is I really find that fascinating, how you have a man that unfit for the office that he's expected to hold, and they even said a lot of the other cardinals were not pleased that he was pope. They knew that he was a very, very, very bad fit, and he caused a lot of major setbacks. And we might have him to thank for the modern religious whole. There's a new denomination of a church every other minute. And so, and whether you like it or not, I know neither one of us are very religious. Even in the secular world, something like that has a tremendous impact. And so, I just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts are on it. And I would highly suggest you research him in your free time, because he really, I mean, in my Renaissance, we had to learn a lot about him because he had that much impact.
Well, I know of Pope Alexander VI. I haven't spent a tremendous amount of time looking into him. I know he's a Spaniard, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do think we've drifted quite far afield, though, talking about popes, and perhaps this would be a good point at which to wind down the conversation, since we've traversed many different areas, and we've landed in the domain of history. And I find history, fascinating. I like history, but it's important to stay on topic. I think,
Main
yeah,
topic with that was my main topic with that is that does relate to the black pill, because it's not the pay. I wasn't the pay. The only reason that was relevant was as a pope, that was the highest power you could have in the land at the time, and that
yeah,
determines social economic. That determines. I mean, like I said, I mean, literally South America. The border definitions are because of him. Some 500 something years later, and he was very popular with the people of Rome. He was very popular, which at that time, the like I said, the papacy was the most powerful position you could have in the world. It usurped kings. And so when you have somebody like that that's very unfit, and they're just put in there because basically, they're good with words, and they were good looking, and people are fond of them, it usually causes it has a huge consequence on the rest of society. And like, for instance, like Warren Harding, he was the same way. Our what was he, our 29th president, died in office. The Teapot Dome scandal was actually elected because his election was the first election that females could vote in, after 1919, after the, what was that? I think the 20th Amendment, the 20th Amendment that allowed females to vote, and he was actually put in office because he was considered well above average, good looking. And you can look at the Teapot Dome scandal was a devastating. I think he even pawned off White House China. And you look at Kennedy. Kennedy's the same way. The Kennedy assassination, Kennedy getting shot, he was considered good looking. His assassination, quite honestly, probably was the beginning of where America is today. Because after he was shot, you see the decline. Nobody was going to kill Nixon. I mean, nobody was going to. Even Nixon said that they would have never killed me the way they did Kennedy, because Kennedy, it was a big statement, and you can see the domino effect of that within social economics. So I was kind of, even though it seemed off topic, all I was saying is it very much relates to kind of what I'm getting at, where I do kind of feel bad, I guess, to wind this conversation down. I do kind of feel bad that sometimes I'm put in these positions where there is a large consequence to, because, as the saying goes, the more power you have, the more responsibility you have. And that's simply because the power is misused. If secular power is misused, it has a huge, tremendous impact on everyday lives, and it actually affects kind of how things work. And so that was my whole point with that. That was all I was going with. I know it seemed off topic, but I think that if you study some of these very impactful, some of the most impactful world figures in a bad way, usually there was something very charming, alluring about them that people love, and ironically, they end up being the complete opposite of what they were supposed to be. And so I do actually have a question for you on that. A black pill question is, why do you think that? I'm trying to think how I want to frame that, because especially going to Warren Harding. Warren Harding once said when he was president, said, "I have no business being president." He said, "I'm from a small town in the middle of nowhere, nowhere, and somehow I'm in the highest office of the land," and he felt completely unfit to be there. And actually, by all accounts, he was completely unfit to be there. But because of his good looks, because of he looked presidential. That's even what the Republicans said. They said in the 1920 election that he looks like a president. That was one of his big things. Um, and yet somebody like him, they know they don't belong there. And like I told you, I've told you countless times I've been put into positions where I just don't belong. And it's interesting that these things like that, they have so much weight. Um, but at the same time, it seems like they're kind of careless. Like there's this careless thing of like, oh well, he looks like it, so I'm going to put him there. And even if they completely shit the bed, so kind of winding this down. What or do you have any thoughts on that? Or
What on that occasionally attractive, seemingly charismatic people are actually not fit for the role, and people base their um, assignment of their offices on factors other than their competences. Yeah, I think that's not surprising at all. It happens frequently, in fact.
yeah, but I don't think people truly understand that. I mean, like I said, like you look at people like the people I just described. I mean, they had massive in I wouldn't say Warren Harding necessarily did. I mean, he was kind of a nobody president, but at the time he was insanely popular. But it's not that it's in of itself it's surprising. It's just the actual, I guess, that people put up with it, so to speak. That people don't ever realize, man, this is a really, because in my experiences that I had, what I noticed is that people, they never came to, and I think it might have been an ego thing on their part. Like they might have not wanted to admit that, I was not meant for the role and that they were completely wrong in assigning me it. But one of the things that I noticed is in my experience is that a lot of people, they didn't remove, once I started shitting the bed, so to speak. I like using that. I'm sorry, I used it a lot, but I think it's very fitting. They didn't try to remove me from that. In fact, they just try to say, let's see how this works out. Let's see how it works out. And if it just continued not to work out, then it would just become something they tried to ignore. And it would just keep snowballing and snowballing and snowballing. It seems like there's never a point where it's like enough is enough with those types of situations where it's like, hey, this is quite bad. This is not what we want to do. And so that was something that I noticed through my experiences. And actually, I think that's why I've kind of ascended to where I am, thinking ape, is that basically, despite me shitting the bed and not being fit for anything, that probably a lot of things I was given, in terms of me not being groomed for it, is I was never really removed from it. Except for the fraternity thing. That was one of the few things that I was actually, they were done with me. That was an exception. But in my high school years, people always tried to make it work. And I even, when I talked to Monday, I said that. I said, in one of his videos, he talked about me saying that. As I said, one of the interesting things about the halo effect is that people will always try to make it work. They'll always try to make it fit. They'll you could be a square peg and they're trying to fit you in the circle box, and it just never fits if they keep trying. And it's interesting to me from a psychological standpoint that, and obviously there's always breaking points, but it seems like that breaking point is so insanely high that it's crazy. It's like, why would you just, why wouldn't you just remove me and just replace me with somebody else?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. It people have their fixed notions of the way things are supposed to be, and they will try to fit you into that, right?
Yeah, and then one last point I'll say before we go is, as I'm sorry, we did brush over the high school thing real quickly, so I'm just trying to, before we go, I'm trying to give the last bits of my experience with it. One of the things, the last thing I really noticed about being attracted, or I'm not gonna say attracted, I know that's a, or being is where I was at on the whatever, is that one of the things that I noticed with it was that you were kind of expected to be a de facto leader. So the interesting thing about it was is that there's there's like a it's like a this is again the halo effect, but there's a de facto leadership um thing assigned to it where that's where a lot of times I got in trouble for was, like we would, I really didn't give a shit how Sally did on, on her 5K. I didn't really care how well Tucker, I didn't, these are just names I'm making up, but I really didn't care how they did. I mean, I didn't have anything against them or anything. There was nothing nefarious, but I wasn't going to, you know, you know, kiss babies and that wasn't who I was. I wasn't, like I said, we talked about my childhood about me not being really allowed to really commingle. I would even say there might have been some resentment in my high school days because I I really that wasn't what I was groomed for, and all of a sudden people want to give me all this stuff, and it's like, well, where were you when I was a kid, but when I got all these things, I noticed that that was something that was it was kind of disturbing to me because even me myself, taking my ego out of it, I was like, I don't think I'm the best. I don't think I'm necessarily, a leader. And you're talking to me. I don't think I come off as very charismatic or anything. I'm not really. That's not really who I am. But I kind of in a way was seen as charismatic by default because people just were like, oh, well, they kept putting me in this higher pillar than I was really meant for. And it was flattering. I mean, it was nice, it was nice getting that treatment. It was nice being able to do these things. But it was also kind of disturbing because it's like, man, I really I don't have any business being here. I'm next to people that were groomed for this, that I'm a big fan of people being groomed for roles. I think that's actually I think that's something like the Germany educational system. They do. I think that's why Europe has better schools than America because they groom people for actual positions they're supposed to have, which is something America for some reason really doesn't believe in. But I wasn't groomed for it, and so I think that was one of the most rewarding yet disturbing situations about my high school experience, and even now to a certain degree, though not as much because I'm in a bigger setting. I'm in the real world, so I'm in a bigger setting. But in high school was this kind of like this de facto leader, like, well, if there's not like somebody that's clearly in charge. And in fact, I'll even tell you something that I after I shit the bed and I got 201st in that race, there was a big argument we had in the locker room where one of the top guys was having a big argument with me because he was like, like kind of like, like you suck. We thought you were going to be a lot better. I was still good, but I was by no means excellent. And I was like, well, this and that, and trying to defend myself. And one of the guys, after everybody was gone, so this is, he didn't say this publicly, so everybody's gone, so there's no social repercussion for it. He said, "I feel like Tucker's not going to be the number one guy next year." He's like maybe it will be you. And I'm like looking at him, I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I'm like last on varsity right now. I'm not going to be our number one guy next year." I mean, and the thing is I knew he wasn't trying to flatter me because he actually was pissed off at me because he had taken some of my advice for his race. He was like our top JV guy. He'd taken some of my advice, and I really didn't want to give him any advice, but he had taken it. And I was like, I would do this, and he didn't do awful, but he didn't do great because I think my advice just was because I wasn't, I was still pretty new to that position. So he was actually pretty pissed off that I gave him some bad advice. But after everybody was gone, so like there was no social repercussions for him saying it in front of some of the other guys. It's like, mate, I think you might be our number. And I was like, no, and I never was. I think the best I was fifth out of there's usually seven varsity guys that can run each race. That was the best I was fifth. I was usually like sixth, seventh. I was like basically almost JV level, but I was always kind of that like that. You're good, so you can get a participation varsity. You can compete with some of these varsity guys, but you're never going to get a medal, and you're never going to get And so, I a humbling thing, if I have to humble myself, thinking ape, is that realizing that I don't really think the outside of me, the way people perceive me, is the real me. I know it's not. I know at best I'm probably intellectually wise, that might be a little bit different. I don't think I've ever had a proper IQ test. I don't know with that, but in terms of social skills, I'm probably average at best, and that's just something I have to live with. But I thought you might find that interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your time and reaching out. Appreciate everything that you've said and your contributions.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I just felt bad. I didn't really. I don't want you to think I've been fiending to have an interview with you. I just felt bad because I know that with Monday was trying forever to get me to talk to you. I didn't really know much about your channel. I think I started watching it after Monday told me that you were wanting to talk to me back in 2019. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I wonder who this guy is. And that's how it all started. I really didn't know, and I've seen some of your videos where you've been wanting to talk to me. I was like, I should reach out to him because I feel bad. I like to contribute where I can. And really kind of all I'm trying to do here is I don't want anybody to think this is really not an ego thing for me. What it really is I think that I'm kind of an interesting case study because kind of to wrap sum my life up and kind of to wrap this combo up is just kind of what I've said. I was born to a very black father, white single mother, teenage. She was old. 19 when she had me. It wasn't like she was 14, but still a teenage pregnancy. And and my grandparents kind of begrudgingly took me. It worked out. I have a good relationship with my grandparents. I'm actually about to go back to their house, but if you look at my background, it really shouldn't have it really shouldn't have gotten to the point where I'm at now, where I'm at the verge of having I have great credit. I Every time I go to Sam's Club here, they're begging me to get a new damn credit. I have great credit. I have a nice place here, and I'm almost done with my degree, and I probably have a nice cushy six-figure job waiting for me once I graduate. I've already talked to a few companies and stuff. If I don't go back to, might go back to the farm and try to run that. I don't know, but it's I'm not trying to make this an ego thing. I completely understand a lot of it's completely out of my control, and that it's just kind of the way things worked out. And I'm not, and I think that could be a. I kind of want to let people know that people like me, quote unquote, that sometimes it's just those people they just had a good luck somewhere, and it's not. I'm by no means. I wasn't like some crazy guys like I know how to. I'm not like some red pros like I know how to ascend, and I drew out this map and it worked out perfectly because I'm some social savant and I just knew how to do things. A lot of it was just kind of it's just how things worked out and how other people perceive me, and I just kind of took advantage of that, and I said, you know what, if that's how people perceive me, even if I'm not the exact fit, the benefits are good. I'll take advantage of the benefits and try to be somewhat competent, and I'll roll with it. And that's just kind of been my life story. And I'll have to get back to you in a few years and see if because it could fall apart tomorrow. I could get killed or paralyzed in the car ride back home. I don't know, but as of right now, things look pretty on the up. And looking back at when I was 6, 7, 8, considering psychiatrists and teachers said, this kid is he's pretty much kind of a loser. He's not really gonna, they didn't use that term, of course, but he's not really gonna go anywhere great. Um, it's kind of a sobering reality where it's like, sometimes I'm up at night, 4 or 5, 6 a.m. I'm like, why the hell am I here? I'll be honest with you, sometimes I think this is a dream. I think that I'm gonna wake up from a dream because it just it's a little too surreal for me. But I'm grateful for how it worked out, and I'm grateful for you giving me, your time, even though I know I rambled a little bit, but I thought that I should share that, and I'd like to. help out somebody that's kind of down on their luck, and they don't think there's any hope or anything, and so that's all I wanted out of this. This wasn't an ego thing or anything, and I appreciate you giving me a platform to talk.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you reaching out to me and allowing me to contact you. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, life is just all about luck. I think my final point is there's this misunderstanding. This, people have this artificial categorization of sort of what luck is. It's sort of luck is when, I don't know, you're walking in the park and you see a wallet with no ID in it and it has thousands of dollars. Well, that's a certain type of luck, sure. But they think, for example, that the kind of luck that emerges, well, it's not even, they wouldn't describe it as luck, right? You happen to be 6'3" and attractive, and that's not luck. Well, of course it is. You didn't choose your appearance. So really, in my view, everything boils down to luck. Even your ability to make the best of your luck. I mean, if you'd been less adept socially, then you might not have been able to make the best of it. So yeah, I think you just better hope in life that whatever die have been rolled for you or roll well, and that you get the, well, I'm going to use Dungeons and Dragons terminology. You get the die 20s. You probably don't play the game, but in any event, you get the good die. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. Get lucky. Choose the right parents. Choose the right genes. Have the right circumstances occur to you, and all this is fundamentally luck. I mean, what my pet peeve really is this strange, to my mind, artificial separation between, events which are just clearly luck, like, I don't know, a car swerved onto the sidewalk and it nearly hit you and you got away by a hair's breadth. And when people say, "Oh, you got lucky," well, sure. Um, but the fact that you were smart enough to pursue whatever medicine or engineering or physics, and you were tall enough to command the attention of female kind. I mean, it's all just luck. It's just some of it's more overt, and others another a lot of it the rest of it is downstream from this endless chain of causality that we are the byproducts and the participants in. And so people kind of artificially disentangle the two and say, well, you survive almost getting hit by a car, that's luck, but everything else in your life, from the people you've met and being in the right place at the right time to your mental faculties or whatever, this isn't luck, this is something else. But no, it's all luck at the end of the day. So, yeah. And in some cases, people mm, don't estimate their circumstances correctly. They might uh, over, well, they might underestimate their potential. That happens, but there's some people who overestimate their potential. The I guess ultimately the only thing one can say is, uh, there's a there's an expression in some languages in Europe. You say, well, if you never take the shot, you'll always miss, right? So it behooves everyone to at least make an attempt in theory, but I think also within reason. Obviously, there are limits, and you should work within what you think is reasonable. But yeah, that's what I would have to say about it. And so I'd say in your case, um, you got lucky enough that it worked out. And as you pointed out, it could not work out at some point in time in the future, although we're all praying to the gods that that's not the case, or doesn't turn out to be the case. But yeah, that's my take.
Just the last bit of advice to your followers. And one of the things that I'm a firm believer, and one of the reasons I like your channel is that I agree with you a lot that I don't actually believe in giving. That's like when I talked about my cross country days. I don't like giving specific advice because I know that my situation is very, very, very unique. Whether you think whatever you think, whether you think it's lookism or my grandparents being wealthy, whatever you look at as the causation, my situation is very, very unusual for most people, considering my down, being part black and autistic. But I would tell that your audience what they really should look at the big strategy that I've used that is maybe general enough that I could give is that what I've done is basically like I was never a diehard engineering fan. I like sciences. I like things like that. I really do. But to be honest with you, I'm just getting the degree because it looks good on the resume, and I can hack it, and I sort of like it. And a lot of people they don't. It. I would recommend a lot of people really kind of get Machiavellian about their life. Really look at, hey, you know, I, how can I manipulate this within my control? How can I manipulate this as much as I can that it's like my grandpa always said, it's like you got to have luck to have, but you can sometimes use your luck as a cushion. How can I build myself up to have some kind of cushion, or I have some kind of there's some, because you can always, like you said, you can always kind of manipulate things a little bit. And that's all I've ever done. It's like, I know engineering looks good on the resume, and I know that my degree's paid for, so hey, I can hack it. I'm not going to be a 4.0. I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to graduate with a 4.0. I'm probably going to graduate with a very high 2, low 3. But engineering is a hard enough degree that even a high 2, a low 3, you can get a great job with that just because it's such a prestigious degree and you can stick out. And I'm going to a state school. I'm not going to Cornell. I'm not going to Harvard. I'm going to a state school. And I already know that I can get a great job with that through my experiences with that. And so I think that, like you said earlier, kind of taking advantage of, your situation, whatever. All I've done has been very Machiavellian. I've been, I had a shitty Discover card that only had a $500 credit limit for a long time, and I just, I kind of watched how I utilized it. Kept my utilization down and paid it off every month. Everything you're supposed to do. I got good credit. I got approved for American Express Platinum, which is a harder credit card to get. Now I have well over a $10,000 credit limit, so I don't have to go ask my grandparents for money all the time, and I can pay it off over time. And it looks great on, your credit portfolio and things like that. And so basically, I would just recommend a lot of people just try to get their foot in the door somehow, and from then just try to keep building on that in a general sense. I don't recommend people get caught up in, oh, I really want to do this, I really want to do that. My philosophy is, well, if you make enough money or you get in a good enough position, you can do whatever the hell you want anyways. You can, if you make $600,000 a year, you can go do whatever the hell you want with that money. You can go, whatever. And so it's a little bit Machiavellian, but the way I look at life is, don't look at things from like a small picture mindset of, how can I, what can I do? How can I get away with doing what I want? It's like, why don't I try to get to a point where I can do whatever I want eventually? And obviously I had a lot of great luck. So I suggest a lot of people don't try to take my personal life and relate it to theirs, but within their own lives, maybe kind of live by that philosophy and just say, kind of be a little bit more Machiavellian and be like, how can I manipulate my situation where, yeah, I'm not doing what I really want to do right now, but in 10 years I can do whatever the hell I want because I'm either having enough money or I have good enough social skills or whatever that, excuse me, that I can just kind of get away with what I want to get away with. And I think that's actually probably as close to happiness as a lot of people are going to get, because a lot of people where they're unhappy is, the bills pile up and, they can't do anything they want. They got 4 kids at home because they knocked up somebody at 1920, and, next thing you know, they're paying child support, and basically you've lost control of life. You're completely reactionary. You're not proactive. You've lost complete control of life. And the sad thing is, you're done. You get to a certain point where you're 45, you got $100,000 in debt, you got child support, you're done. You're not recovering from that. You're done. I know people like that. And so, I just, your younger audience, I would just say, don't get into a position where, your goose is cooked. Try to take advantage of your situation, be Machiavellian, and ascend if you can ascend. And that's just my recommendation. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, then yes, thank you very much for contacting me and giving me your time, and I hope the audience got something from this.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.